Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at The Rings of Power, both the TV show, which is coming up soon in September, and also slightly more broadly, The Rings of Power themselves in Tolkien's Legendarium. What are they? What can they do? Any questions you've got about that? And I am delighted that I have got a very special guest today. Shaun Gunner from the Tolkien Society. Shaun, welcome. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, Robert. Hi, everybody.
For those who do not know the Tolkien Society, do you want to just briefly sort of explain the work of the Tolkien Society? What are you? What do you do? Why are you so awesome?
So, the Tolkien Society, we are an educational charity based in the UK, but we're worldwide. We were founded in 1969, and our aim is to promote research into and educate the public in the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So it was founded in 1969, and our founder, a lady called Vera Chapman, she actually got to meet Tolkien herself in 1972, and when she approached him, she asked him if he wanted to be our president, and he said yes. So we have a kind of official recognition by the man himself, and we've continued to enjoy a relationship with the Tolkien family ever since. We've now expanded to 4,000 members across 70 different countries around the world. We publish regular journals and magazines, we publish books, and we host events both online and in person. Our most famous one being called Oxenmoot, which happens every September at an Oxford college.
Fantastic. And one of the reasons I've got Shaun on, as well as being an excellent guest, is we were both, you may have seen this if you're on Twitter and places like that, we were both among the 30 or so people who were invited to watch some footage from season 1 of The Rings of Power. So that is something we're going to be talking about in a moment. I do just very quickly, that's why I wasn't here last week. I should probably clarify. I was very vague about my reasons for not being here last week. I said something like for the best of reasons, and I know at least one person guessed it. I was dying to say yes, but I couldn't. But anyway, that's why I wasn't here last week. What I try to do on these live streams is just very quickly run through a few of the things that are happening in the wider sort of fantasy sci-fi world. So I'll just quickly go through them in case you missed any of this, because a lot happened over the last week or so. House of the Dragon, which, as we know, will be launching 21st of August. We have had the first full trailer. We had a teaser trailer back in November. We've had the first full trailer. I loved it, I have to say. I thought it was excellent. If you are interested in my thoughts on that, I've done a full video breakdown of that, which came out yesterday. So I'm not proposing on taking questions on that right now, because I really want to focus in on what was a really exciting event and the footage from Rings of Power. But maybe at the end, if you do have any questions about that, do let me know. The Wheel of Time, season 2 has finished filming. There wasn't a huge announcement about that, but word has got out. I think we can probably expect that later in this year. Because this is an Amazon thing, it would probably work if it follows on from Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, but that's just a guess. So October, November, something like that. Doctor Who. We've got a new Doctor announced. Ncuti Gatwa is going to be the 14th Doctor. This is, I think, good news. You may well know him from Sex Education. He was a very sort of charismatic, ebullient character there. It brought a huge amount of vivacity to that role. I think season 4 of Sex Education is coming out soon, actually, if you're interested in that. And I learned when I just Googled him, I think I have seen him live in a play as well. Much Ado About Nothing. Not Much Ado About Nothing. He was in Midsummer Night's Dream at the Globe in London. I have to admit, to my shame, I cannot remember his particular acting in that, but it was a fantastic performance. So I think this is good news. Expect the regeneration from 13 to 14 to happen in a one-off special this autumn, and then I think his proper first season probably won't be, probably autumn next year, something like that. Finally, Westworld season 4. They've been very quiet about Westworld. We have now got a trailer which looks beautiful. and a release date, which is early June. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. I have covered Westworld in detail on this channel in the past. I think I'm not going to cover it in as much detail this time around, simply because I haven't got time because of both House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power happening. But I will be really watching it, and I would highly recommend, random recommendation, Hax Dogma, who I worked with a lot in the last season of Westworld. I'm sure we'll be covering this in detail, so please do go and check him out. Okay, that was a very quick run through, but that was because I wanted to get onto what we're talking about today. Shaun, I mean, I think I know the answer to this. Are you much of a fan of any of those things that I've been talking about, or are you just a Tolkien geek?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm more of a Tolkien person, so I've dipped in and out of some of those things, but it's all about Tolkien for me. You know, he is the professor. He's the father of modern fantasy. I start with the best.
Start and finish with the best. Excellent. Okay, well, let's talk about the thing I'm dying to talk about, which is this footage we saw, and also equally important, I would say, a chance to talk to the showrunners. I'll quickly give the context for this for those who are unaware of it, and then Shaun, I'd love to hear your thoughts. The Amazon invited, I don't know the exact number, it was 30-ish, 30-something people to come and watch some footage last week. Now, that group of people was Tolkien academics. There were YouTubers, 4 or 5 YouTubers, including some other channels that you may well know. There were some TikTokers. There were some website owners, and a few other people as well. Basically, some of the great and the good within the Tolkien community. We were in Oxford and London, and we had a chance for the footage itself. We saw around 20 minutes. So this wasn't an episode or episodes or anything like that. It was around 20 minutes of material. We then got a chance to have a Q&A session with the showrunners, and also a bit after that to sort of mingle and chat to them in a slightly less formal kind of context. Now, as you will expect, there are things that we can and things that we can't say about that. This isn't a gag order or anything like that. This is simply to save on spoilers and things like that. So I entirely understand that. Broadly speaking, we can talk about the high level stuff, how we feel about things, what we experienced, but detailed questions about what we saw, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer. So when you're thinking about what questions to ask, please do bear that in mind. But Shaun, I want to come to you because people, I'm sure, are dying to know, what were your thoughts, feelings, having seen that, experienced that?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because I was quite apprehensive going into this, not only because this is an entirely new experience, seeing the Lord of the Rings as a TV series, but I've actually been my youthful appearance betrays it, but I'm in my 10th year as the chair of the Tolkien Society. So
surely not.
Yeah, so I was actually the chair when the Hobbit films came out, and I was lucky enough I got to go to premieres. I went to some exclusive events with Warner Brothers at the time. So I kind of knew how some of this would work when we turned up, but we had a much, much bigger and wholesome experience, I think it's fair to say. But I was apprehensive, mainly because I didn't really like the trailer for The Rings of Power. I felt it didn't really sell the show, and fundamentally it was just a minute of quite nice montages of Middle-earth, which actually, if you turned the sound off, you wouldn't even know it was for Tolkien's work. It could have been for any fantasy adaptation. So I did turn up with a little bit of apprehension, or borderline skepticism. I'm trying to keep an open mind as best as possible. When we met the showrunners, it's absolutely clear to me that these are people that understand Tolkien. They get Tolkien. Their ability to, and for those of you who haven't seen it, there's an article I wrote on the Tolkien Society website. Their ability to quote from both Tolkien's letters and Tolkien's works seriously impressed me. Even long-standing Tolkien scholars would struggle to quote as freely as they were able to do. They understood the themes of Tolkien's works. They were able to articulate those. That for me was really exciting. And actually, earlier today, I read an interview with J.D. Payne from about 8 years ago, where he talked about Peter Jackson, funnily enough, as one of his inspirations as a creative. So that was a really great experience. In terms of the actual footage, I think it's fair to say I'm kind of reserving judgment. There were things in there that I absolutely adored, and thought was beautiful, borderline to the point of making me want to cry. I thought it was so lovely. But there were some parts of it that I'm struggling with. The problem we've got is, as you mentioned, Robert, it was 20 minutes of footage. We don't know how it was cut when it was shown for us. We don't know what order it was going in. We don't know the context of these scenes. So it's very, very difficult to kind of give it a seal of approval or a seal of disapproval, either way, right? It's very, very difficult. So for me, there's what I would say to everybody is there's definite promise there. If what they articulated to us, the team, if that transpires on screen, this will be amazing. It really will. The footage that I saw was, it was a bit of a mixed bag, but that I just saw 20 minutes of, the first series is 10 hours. The entire show is going to be 50 hours when it gets to 5 series, and I saw a tiny little slither of it. So, it would be a bit unfair of me to judge the whole thing just on that, which is why I'm listening to what they told us, and you remember, Robert, we had got much more time with the team than we did with the footage. And actually what they were articulating to us was a real understanding, a real knowledge, appreciation, love and affection for Tolkien.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't disagree with much of that, I have to say. Just quickly picking up Roman Lakovet saying, just wanted to thank you again for your great work. Thank you. I sincerely hope that you will remain unbiased while covering Rings of Power despite being at the Amazon event. I just wanted to quickly pick up on that before I'll give my views. Yes, I am absolutely 100% committed to ensuring that what I do is completely independent and unbiased. I think that is the case for what it's worth for all of the other people who were there. I don't think that there was anybody who was unduly influenced in any way. I certainly have never taken any money from Amazon nor intend to or produce anything on behalf of Amazon. So what you get from this channel is my views. That said, what did I see? I think I would agree completely. There are two bits here. There's the footage itself and there's the experience of talking to the showrunners. The footage itself, I quite liked, but I wasn't personally blown away. There was one thing that I saw there that, and I'll ask Shaun later whether it was the same thing that he really liked, that I did hugely appreciate. There were a couple of bits in there that they're not red flags, but there was one trope left over from the Jackson movies that I wasn't particularly happy that seemed to flow into this, and there was a bit of characterization that I wasn't desperately happy with. But at a high level, it looked good. We saw, I should probably just clarify, this was final footage as we understand it. That's what we're told. It was, all the visual effects were final. The music was final. The music, I am going to say, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to break it down that level. The music was awesome and everybody thought the music was awesome. So I think that's an excellent thing. So the footage, I think the way, Shaun, you put it is that it is too early to say. I cannot sit here and tell you that this is going to be great or bad because we couldn't tell about plot, we couldn't tell about characterization in any detail, we couldn't tell how the whole thing was going to be knitting together. What we had was a sort of a visual experience of flavors of Middle-earth in the Second Age, which, as I say, I broadly liked, and there were some bits that I really liked. There were some bits that I wasn't so sure about, but I'm just very much going to be on the fence at the moment of it's too early to say. The showrunners, I think, were, and you will see this, don't just take my word for it, just go and have a look. If you look around the internet, you will find almost everyone who was there has said something somewhere, and I think it's almost unanimous that everybody has said that they were reassured by the showrunners. They were full of energy to start with, very excited, very tall. I wasn't expecting that, but very excited by this project. As Shaun said, they were happily just sort of quoting Tolkien's letters and random bits from obscure things in Unfinished Tales or wherever. They know their stuff. And this was a tough audience to convince that they know their stuff. They're literal Tolkien professors in the audience who were saying, okay, they know their stuff. So they did convince about that. They convinced about their knowledge and their passion. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily equate into creating great work of art. We will have to wait and see. But I, like Shaun, feel that this is in safe hands in as much as these people, they do care. They actually genuinely do care. We've got a few questions that we'll come on to about sort of more from my patrons. As I say, I'm framing this like I do most of my live streams, that we'll have questions from the patrons. I'm going to pick up as many questions in the chat. If you have any questions building on what we've just said, then I will try and pick up on them now. But Shaun, is there anything else that you want to just sort of add before I sort of dive into the chat?
Yeah, so there was a couple of bits. So, first of all, fundamentally, what they were creating, it is clear that the level of craftsmanship going into creating the show is of another level. Like, you would expect this. Everybody knows that they're spending an awful lot of money creating this. It shows everything looks fantastic. It looks like Middle Earth. When you see those shots, you're like, yes, that is the thing that I should be looking at. That does look as it should. I felt, such attention to detail had been taken over many different aspects of what we saw. And again, that shows that real love and care and affection. Now, what I do recognise is, although these people are, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, although they are the showrunners, there is a team of hundreds and thousands of people working behind the scenes on this show. So it's not like every creative decision falls on their shoulders. So I have to keep that in mind, that although what they're articulating to me is pretty much what I want to hear, actually I have to bear in mind that this isn't exclusively their creation. There are many, many, many hands involved in creating. Many hands make light work. There's many people involved in creating this, and there's lots of every single day when you imagine you're on a set, there's lots of granular decisions which all add up. Remember that they aren't the writers for each episode necessarily either. There are a host of writers that are involved in the different episodes. So again, although what they're articulating to me is a very, very positive, there will be individual decisions within those shows as well, each episode, that may not necessarily concord with either Tolkien's works or what I may prefer. But fundamentally, there's a lot of people wanting to just write this off. An awful lot of people wanting to write this off. Partly because they really like the Lord of the Rings films, and therefore they don't want to see this TV series. And I think that's misplaced, particularly if those people say the Amazon TV series isn't going to be Tolkien. I'm like, well, Peter Jackson films made some pretty bad decisions themselves as well, as lovely as those films are. And what I would say to everybody is, try it first. I think everybody deserves to watch this. They definitely, and as I say, there are some scenes in there. I can't talk about them at the moment, but I will. There are some scenes in there that I would wager no Tolkien fan could struggle to watch. There are some absolutely beautiful individual scenes in there that you'll see on screen and you'll think, this is fantastic, and absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And just picking up in the chat, Reflective Rambling saying, I think one thing we also need to remember is that being critical or skeptical does not mean something is bad. In fact, it's healthy to question. It allows for the growth of the fan work. Yeah, and on this channel, I'm certainly going to try and ensure that we have a wide range of voices here. Not everyone will love this, and that's actually okay. It's going to be fine. And my guess is that most Tolkien fans will love some elements of this and some they will question. In the same way that, Shaun, you're talking about the Peter Jackson film, you called them lovely. I don't know many people who use that word, but I know what you mean. But
The Return of the King won 11 Oscars. He's got to be pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. But it's I think most people would say that they're epic or great or something like that, rather than just lovely. But the amount of decisions that were made, I sometimes think to myself, if that were made today, what would the reaction on the internet be? Because just going through, if you just think just back to the first half hour or so of the first film, when you've got where's the 16-year time gap, why on earth are Merry and Pippin just stumbling into this? They were part of the planning from the beginning. What about Farmer Maggot? Where's the Barrow Downs? What about Tom Bombadil? There's the questions, that just the things that were missed out and were changed. Shoot, matter of the feel, for me at least. Do they get the feel right for Middle Earth? From what I've seen, it's promising, is what I would say. The Andrew Kay saying, how were the visuals? Now, one thing I would say, and I would love your thought as somebody who's been in the Tolkien world for a while, we know. And there was actually an interview which came out with Empire magazine, I think just yesterday. John Howe has been involved in this. And I think it's become clear over the last few days, John Howe's involvement is not just like somebody coming in and advising. He has been actively involved all the way through this project. Could you, Shaun, perhaps for those who don't know who John Howe is, could you just explain why I find that reassuring, the fact that his creative vision is a part of this?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, John Howe is one of the longest standing Tolkien artists. So I think his first published Tolkien work, I want to say it's 1987, in a Tolkien calendar. He's done numerous Tolkien calendars. He's done the Hobbit as well. He's done the covers for pretty much every single Tolkien piece of work. The Lord of the Rings. There was a new edition of Unfinished Tales, came out recently. He illustrated that as well. This, and on top of that, so him, there's another artist, Alan Lee, and another one, Ted Naismith. Him and Alan Lee were the conceptual artists for the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films. So they have done this before, and arguably their body of artwork, both in artwork in books and what they've produced for films, is part of what I would describe as the visual canon of Tolkien's world. This is how many people around the world imagine how Middle-earth looks like, is through their artwork. The fact that he appears to be as intimately involved as the Empire interview demonstrates is an encouraging sign, because that means that you've got an artist involved who himself absolutely loves, lives and breathes Tolkien, and who has got that experience of, illustrating the covers to the History of the Middle-earth series. These people are not easy to find, artists of that kind of pedigree.
Absolutely. And I would, for me, when you talk about John Howe, he is, you talked about, I can't remember the exact words, you were very eloquent, but for me it was, when I think of Middle-earth, my imagination conjures up his work. Somebody was there talking about, I love his Gandalf. Yes, if you think of that, the stereotypical Gandalf picture, the big hat striding along, the staff, that's him. He has created this world visually as much as anyone else has. So I think we should be encouraged by that. Lal Hammock, thank you very much for the super chat. You did one just before we went on air as well. I will pick that up later if that's okay with you. We're asking about our opinion on the tone of this series. The Second Age is brutal, and I'm not sure a PG rating can do things like Numenor's enslavement and domination of Middle-earth justice, or what happens to Celebrimbor. So what happens to Celebrimbor is not pleasant. First of all, just in terms of I'd be interested in Shaun's thoughts, but I'll start on this one. in terms of what we saw was from season 1, and I do not know. I haven't been told, so I'm not breaking anything here. I'm assuming that's from episode 1, that this is sort of early on-ish stuff. Now, in order to show what happens later and the importance of it, you have to show the Second Age. A lot of the stories we know in the second half of the Second Age. The first half of the Second Age is actually a time of, if not peace and growth, but it's actually Numenor's doing good. It's expanding out to become the height of human civilization ever. The elves are expanding out into new places, creating great things. The dwarves are doing dwarfish things in Khazad-dûm. Things are good, actually, in the first half of the Second Age. So I would think a lot of the darker stuff will happen in later seasons rather than in the first season. So that's a slightly long-winded way of saying what I saw was not grim and dark, but there were hints of it that kind of that fitted with my understanding, and we'll get onto timeline in a moment because I know that's an issue lots of people are concerned about, my understanding of where that is in the Second Age. But Shaun, what's your sort of take on tone?
Yeah, so when you look at Tolkien's stories, although there's individual episodes that can be quite tough and quite gory, actually these are all written from the perspective of people trying to do good. That's generally the perspective Tolkien's stories are written from, right? People, even the story of Turin Turambar and the Children of Húrin, Turin is trying to do good. He fails spectacularly, but that is what he's trying to do. My hunch is that is the story that we're going to see. We've seen the character posters, 22 odd characters. Some of them, most of them are new characters that have been invented for the series. But I suspect the stories we're going to see around them is them, generally speaking, trying in their own ways to do good in the world. So although I agree with you, we didn't see anything particularly gory, I don't think. And that doesn't mean that I don't think there's anything, that doesn't mean that's not going to be at some point. Very well could be, for instance, there might be a battle at some point. We'll come on, I think there might be a question about what the kind of the end of the series might look like. And I've got some views on what that might be. So there might be battles at some point, but fundamentally, Tolkien's works are also not about battles either. They're about people wanting to live their lives, right? And they're trying to do good, and they're trying to defeat evil in the world in order to do that. And I think that's a story they're going to tell.
Yes, I think that's right. The only thing I would add to that is that the showrunners, the Vanity Fair article, which was the first big thing that they did, they did sort of touch on this in as much as they said this should be something not for all the family, and I can't remember the exact words that they used, but it was basically, yes, there should be some frightening moments, but it should be something that sort of older children should be able to watch, the same kind of feel as, say, the Peter Jackson films, as in there's not going to be gore and gruesome things for their own sake. There will be some scary moments because that is how you get good plot and exciting storylines, but it is going to be accessible. Varking Runesong is in the chat. Hi there. Good to see you. Saying thanks for being such a solid community member and hanging out with Fellowship fans. And I think that's directed you, Shaun. This is Varking as an excellent and wonderful member of the wider Tolkien community. And I think you're coming on Fellowship fans tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, I'm going on there with Varking, funnily enough.
Excellent news. Well, it's great to see you, Varking, and thank you for your support. Cloaked One, picking up a question for Gear. Thank you very much. I love it when you do things like this. Very kind. Saying, can you please say something about the time compression? Did you get a good explanation about how they will do that? Okay, so we've got a few questions, but let's answer this now. I'll just quickly bring up some questions I had from my patrons related to this. Gabriel Farrell saying, well, actually, you said it was a shame that I didn't get to meet you while I was in Oxford. I apologize. I couldn't tell anyone I was in Oxford. They were very clear about that, so that's why I couldn't say anything about it. But next time, saying, did you get a chance to hear more about the compression of the Second Age timeline? I know myself and lots of other people are worried about that. And Mara Lee saying, we'll have to compress a lot. Do you think? Well, that was more about the ending that we'll get onto. But let's talk about time compression. So this was something I've talked about a few times on this channel. This is the thing I went into this the most concerned about, and I know a lot of other people are most concerned about. For those who don't know what the issue is, the Second Age is a big amount of time, 3,500 years. It's a lot of time going by, and a lot of things happen during that. The showrunners during that Vanity Fair article said that they took the creative decision to compress the timeline of the Second Age because they wanted to tell the big stories. The big stories that they were name-checking being the rise of Sauron, the forging of the rings, the rise and the fall of Numenor, and the last alliance of elves and men. And so they said what they were concerned about was that if you kept over this thousands of years time scale, then you'd have to be changing actors every few episodes because these things happen hundreds, thousands of years apart, and they wanted to have the same human characters. Yes, the elves will be going all the way through, but human characters would need to be replaced a lot. So they made the creative decision to crunch the timeline a bit. I was a bit concerned about that. A lot of other people were concerned about that. Now, I think you actually also asked them during the sort of the mingling session. I did ask them about this. And although we're not, I don't know whether you wish to add anything to this, Shaun, but I shall stick my neck out a bit and say we're not supposed to say the details of what they said, but given the things we know, I feel that I got as good an answer to that as I could have hoped for. So that's my general feeling from that. I think I now have got a very clear understanding in my mind about what they are doing. So the events from Sauron's rise, the forging of the rings ish, to the end of the Second Age, they have already confirmed those are going to be compressed. In the context of that, I will allow you to speculate amongst yourselves what you think best answer that I feel I could have got from that would have been. But Shaun, is there something you'd like to add on sort of time compression?
Yeah, so I think, funny enough, I've got my reading copy of The Return of the King in front of me, which has the appendices at the back. Because actually, when you look at this, for the first 1,500 years, nothing happens, really. Very, very little in Middle-earth happens, or indeed in Numenor. You then have this flurry of activity when the rings are made, Sauron makes the rings, there's war, Rivendell is founded, etc. And then essentially you have another 1,500 years where not a lot happens until we get to the point where Alpharazon comes to power in Numenor. Numenor falls. You got the two realms in exile, founded by Elendil, Isildur, and Meneldir and Arion, etc. The whole family there, and then there's the Last Alliance, right? So actually, although we're talking about a period of time which is 3,500 years, for the broad thrust of the story we're talking about, which is relating to the Rings of Power, we've actually got just kind of two flashpoints. One at the year 1500, 1600, 1700 time, and then the second one at the end. Actually, all you need to do is pick up the events at kind of the year 1500 and put them immediately before the downfall of Numenor. Now, and again, I agree with the point. One of the things before we heard the announcement about time compression, I had pondered publicly and privately how they were going to deal with this, because actually there are only really 4 characters that are there for the journey, which is Elrond, Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Sauron. And Gil-galad and Sauron both suffer at the end of it, right? Now, arguably, you could include Círdan, at the Grey Havens, but he's kind of a bit peripheral character in it. But fundamentally, there's only really 4 that are there, and 2 of them die at the end, right? Or at least in Sauron's case, loses his body. So
spoilers.
yeah, right. Apologies if you're not.
No, I'm joking. If it's in the books, then I'm not worried about it.
But so in that sense, you can see how. Imagine a scenario, right, where almost every couple of episodes you had a new king of Numenor. That would be pretty confusing and difficult for the show to have to deal with. So I can kind of understand it. I suspect I'm going to be one of those people, and I suspect some of the people in the chat might be in this category as well. There will be some uncomfortable decisions made in order to facilitate that. The fact that we aren't going to have that amount of time. One of the things that I'm concerned about is actually that tension that we got within the Second Age in Numenor is essentially because elves don't die and men do. And I need to see how they're going to deal with that tension on screen. And a part of that is also how do elves and men live their lives differently, right? Because for an elf, 100 years is that. But for a man, that's their entire life. A normal man. For a Numenorian, that's maybe a third, half, a quarter, a fifth, depending on the Numenorian and when in the timeline it is. So, I think we are going to need to see how they translate that tension on screen. But I can understand how I think they're going to go about it. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Seems like quite a long answer.
I think so, and I think it's probably worth just taking the moment to pause and I will look directly into the camera. This will not be canon. The TV show is not going to be replicating exactly what's in the books, and I think we should be very clear about that up front. So that does mean that there will be things which they will change. Some of those things they will change will be big things. There will be some characters who are in Tolkien's history that do not exist in this version. Some of those will be minor characters. Some of those might be characters that you particularly wanted to see. Just off the top of my head, if you're compressing all of that time, I can't see that they will have all of the Numenorian kings and queens in that history. They simply will not be there. So there will be some creative decisions that people will disagree with. And I keep on going back to the Peter Jackson movies. The amount of things in there that they changed was huge. And it's a matter of, is the feel right? And that's what I'm going to be going with all the time. Does it still feel right? You cannot just do one for one across the piece, just exactly what Tolkien had there. That's not how adaptations work. And some of the changes will be big. So brace yourself for that. If you haven't quite gone through that mental, I think at some point all complete Tolkien geeks have to go through that mental leap to say, okay, this is not going to be exactly what, when I was reading through about the Second Age, was there. There will be changes. Let's go to Flotfear13. Thank you so much, saying no question, just a show of support for all the amazing videos you create. Keep at it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I appreciate it also.
Oh, thank you very well. All your wonderful articles, I will say for you. Cloaked One, thank you, picking up for Kelly Summers. Question saying, if the show is as successful or well received as we hope, do you think that Amazon will try to launch spin-offs quickly or with a similar lead time as this? suggesting Turin or Irendil or Angmar. Do you want to go first on this one, Shaun? So
yeah, so
spin-offs.
Yeah, so publicly, they have confirmed that they don't have the rights to anything from the Silmarillion. So I suspect, as things stand, unless something massive changes, that's out. In terms of spin-offs, I think the question that Amazon and the team would have to answer is, what is the spin-off of, and kind of how does it fit in? Because actually, if you do a spin-off after the event, right, and we all know series, right, where there's a spin-off after the main series has concluded, it feels a bit like, a bit of a side event. And actually, I'm not sure they'd want to be putting that level of investment into what is something fundamentally a side event. If you do your spin-off whilst the main show is going on, it could be a bit of a distraction. If you don't do it right. So if you're going to do a spin-off, I suspect the best way of doing it is somehow them being kind of running in parallel, kind of slightly overlapping. But I don't know how they would fundamentally do it. If I'm really honest, like I at the moment, I can't see who their characters would be and what their story would tell. I can tell you what I would quite like, right? So I'll tell you what I would like. So as far as we know, there are no wizards going to be in this show. There are no wizards in the Second Age. I would love a series that's telling me what the wizards are up to. Right? We've got the blue wizards that we basically know next to nothing about. Radagast pops up incredibly briefly, and really Gandalf and Saruman, we only know about the last few hundred years when they're in Middle Earth. What are they doing the rest of the time? Like, hopefully, cool stuff. Right, and I think that would make. I think it would, again. It wouldn't be canon at all. It would be very, very far from it. I think it could be quite an enjoyable series that could stand on its own 2 feet. Whereas this one, the way this story goes, because I believe the 5th series will essentially end with the Last Alliance and the death of Sauron. I don't know this, by the way. That's my guess. Is that's the ending point, because that's the end of the Second Age. The story is kind of closed off at that point. It's resolved, right? Everything is dealt with. What would the spin-off be that would attract people to it? So that's my view.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a lot of people in the chat saying. I mean, Jason Keane saying with a sad face, so we'll never see Beren and Luthien, and things like that. I think it's worth saying, and I have no inside information on this, so this isn't me leaking or speculating. But at the moment, Amazon do not have the rights to various things. That doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be somebody else who's going to come along and with the rights to certain things and make them. We know already we've got an anime film, The War of the Rohirrim, which is going to be coming out, I think, in 2024. So there is an appetite out there in the world for more Tolkien, and where there's a will, there's a way, is my general view. If this is a success, and I personally see no reason why it won't be a success. If this is a success, I think we will see more Tolkien stuff out there. Whether that's anime movies, whether that's a spin-off TV series, I think some of those great first stage. I mean, I love your idea about what the hell were the wizards up to? I think that's a great idea. But some of those great first stage stories that Beren and Luthien, I mean, the Children of Húrin would make a fantastic sort of epic series, I think. So I think that we will get more. But when and who knows? Mara Lee, hi there, Mara, saying, in honor of the Alliance of Elves and Men, looking forward to watching the show when it airs in the fall. You also did, before we went on air, Super Chat saying, just a show of love and support and gratefulness for all the fabulous content, merch and stories on both your channels. Yes, I have another channel, The Well Told Tale. Do check it out if you're interested. You are the best. Much love and hugs to Dan, your gorgeous dog, yes, who has fallen asleep somewhere. this, I think that was, and you also did a super stick. Thank you. Very generous as always, Mari. You were one of the legends of this community. So thank you very much. You know how much I appreciate your support, and I know many other people do too. Let's go to, we've sort of picked on this a couple of times, but let's go to a couple of questions from about the timeline, when it might start, when it might end. Diego Godoy, hola, saying, hola, Robert. I wanted to ask a basic question as someone who doesn't know much of the lore of Tolkien's world. Could you please provide a bit of context again on when in the history the show is going to take place? What do you think will be the starting and ending points? Mara Lee was asking how far back in the history of Numenor do you think that we'll go? And then also saying about when will it end, and coming up with a lovely idea with do you think it'll end how with that sort of flashback scene we had at the beginning of the first film, The Fellowship of the Ring, with Galadriel's retelling of the story. Would be fabulous if they got Cate Blanchett back to do a voiceover in order to tie it in with the three movies. Well, love, obviously, Cate Blanchett. But Shaun, why do you pick up any of those bits that you want? Where what sort of beginning, ending, timeline? What do you think there?
Yeah, so I think the ending is much easier, which is, it is surely, the ending I kind of want to see is a little bit, is the Last Alliance. Gil-galad is dead. Elendil is dead. Sauron is essentially, he's lost his body, and in my own head, I imagine the last shot as Isildur holding the ring and just looking at the screen, and that's end, right? So that's how I think we're at the end, is somewhere around that. In terms of the beginning, I think that's a little bit harder to define, again, because of what the time compression looks like. I suspect we will start sometime before the forging of the rings, and I'm going to imagine, for the sake of argument, and again, I don't know, the season finale, or say season 2 or season 3, might be the One Ring existing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we kind of end up. In terms of Numenor, I think this is actually one of the hardest challenges that they've got, because as you guys hopefully all know, Numenor will be gone. And again, I might guess that's the end of season 4, for instance, might be the loss of Numenor. And they've got to introduce this new realm and then at some point take it away from fans. It'll be interesting to see whether they take an approach which is similar to the Lord of the Rings films, through flashbacks, prologues type things, because there's going to be a number of realms they're going to have to define. So they've got to define Numenor, they've got to define Lindon as well, they've got to define Eregion. They've also got to define what we know as Moria, but is then Khazad-dûm, because that we know that's going to be a realm as well. We've seen some of that. So we have to kind of imagine, like, and similarly, there's going to be some realms that we already know about. So like Lothlorien, that exists. Rivendell should exist at some point. What is happening on in Mordor? Mordor exists. At the point in the story, Sauron is supposedly, a good 500 years before the rings start being made, Sauron is in Mordor. So how do they introduce all those realms? How they take the game? Again, I suspect that's going to be done through flashbacks, because actually, again, going back to the earlier point and doing it as literally through the history is going to be kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, I think so. The season 1, part of their job is introducing this world, because this world is Middle Earth as we know it, but there are some big differences. So some of the things that we're aware of, and the Shire isn't there. Mm-hmm. The Numenor is this massive island continent, effectively, which is hugely important, which in the Third Age isn't there. Where are the elves? We think of the elves in sort of the Third Age. Well, you've got Lothlorien, you've got Rivendell. Actually, Linden. Is like the main, and so it's the world is the same world, but it's different. So they will have to introduce this story. I'm personally reasonably convinced that our entry point is going to be Galadriel, because this is a character that everybody knows and will be all the way through this season, and that will allow us a kind of a soft entry to the world, because otherwise everything they will have to sort of kind of have to explain in the same way that they had for the Lord of the Rings. They had that big flashback sequence at the beginning that actually didn't last that long. I don't know how long it was, but it was
about 5 minutes.
5 minutes, something like that. They've got a lot of information that they will need to drop in this TV show just so we understand on Earth what's going on, and a lot of things that simply aren't there. What on earth is this Morgoth person that they keep on talking about? What's going on there? Why is it that we've got some elves who are like got a bit of a grudge against other elves? A lot of things that we just need to explain. What on earth is Numenor? So they need to explain a huge amount. In terms of timeline, my best guess is they are focusing. The main narrative is focusing on those areas, that those big things, the big stories that the showrunners have said they want to tell. So we will have the build up. They will, they pretty much confirmed in a number of different places. One of the big fun games of season 1 is going to be playing Who's Sauron, because Sauron is not the big evil nasty character that we all know with all of his mason sort of dark armor. He is going to be of fair hue, I think is the way that Tolkien described him. He is going to be sexy Sauron. He's going to be nice Sauron. He's going to be charismatic Sauron. He's going to be somebody who can wheedle his way into people's confidences. And at some point it will become obvious who he is because he starts making rings and stuff. But to start with, we won't know who he is, and the characters in the show will not know who he is. So that's the starting point for me. The end point, I agree with you. They will tie it in with that the ring, the end of, because this will be the forging of the rings, and then it will end with the ring being cut from Sauron. Maybe they'll go in that a little bit more than that, but I love your idea of the last shot is of Isildur just with the ring, and it's like, yeah, that's it. We know what happens then.
I just want to pick up on one point, because you mentioned about us not knowing who Sauron is. Now, in the First Age, Sauron is a baddie, but he's not the main baddie. He's assistant baddie, right? And by the Second Age, he's now emerging as the baddie. But I mentioned earlier about the varieties of good. And how they're all kind of trying to do good. And actually, there's a good quote. So in The Lord of the Rings, Elrond says this, which is, "For nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so." And he talks about it, and he goes on to say, "I fear to take the ring to hide it. I would not take the ring to wield it." And then Gandalf says, "Nor I," right? And actually, it's an interesting point, because that idea that nothing is evil in the beginning, is this something we're going to see, where we're going to play this guessing game with Sauron? Is he going to be a bit more ambiguous about, actually, is he good, is he evil? What might cause him to want to be, the big baddie after the fall of his boss, right? Why would he want to do that? And I don't know whether we're going to see that narrative. Fundamentally, the show is called The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. So I suspect it's going to focus on the Lord of the Rings being Sauron and the Rings of Power. And I suspect that is the narrative that fundamentally we're going to see. Beyond the end of the Second Age, after after year 2 of the Third Age, the ring sits at the bottom of a river for 2,500 years. So I don't think that would make very interesting viewing as a show. Hence why I suspect we end at the Last Alliance or kind of just after it. What would be interesting, the one thing that I'm quite interested in is how much do we see the foundations of Gondor and Arnor as the realms of exile, and then actually, to the point lots of us raise, how much they look like in the former case, Gondor looked like the Gondor of the Lord of the Rings films. Again, that'd be an interesting one, because that's a narrative they're going to have to tell, which is not just the destruction of Numenor, but these two new kingdoms coming up in Middle Earth, and two new kingdoms popping up in Middle Earth where there are other peoples living in them. Will there be a tension there between them? We don't know.
Yeah, and I think some of this may depend, and they will have mapped all this out already, I'm sure. But if the ending of season 4 is the downfall of Numenor, the destruction of that, and the ships going out, then you've got season 5. The entire season will be the survivors landing in Middle Earth, founding kingdoms, Sauron managing to sort of scrape his way back to Mordor, and him building his strength up. So we will have an entire season of Gondor and Arnor and Mordor all just recovering and gaining strength and growing before that final climactic battle. So it will actually feel like quite a different series, having got rid of, which it should do, having got rid of Numenor. Suddenly we've got an entirely new world being created. Let's dip into the chat. We had a few questions I just want to answer. Eric just saying, fun question, this one. What was it with Aula that made his servants fall? Both Sauron and Saruman were servants of Aula, and they both fell to evil. Well, I'll give a quick answer to this one. Shaun, I'm sure you'll have thoughts as well. For those who don't know, so this is Aula the Smith, one of the Ainur, so one of the sort of the ruling pantheon, as it were, in Middle Earth. Attached to each of these Ainur, there were various Maiar. Now, the Maiar, as we know, are people like Gandalf and Saruman and Sauron and people like that. The question is, why do the ones who seem to attach themselves to Aula, why did they go bad? And I think, well, I don't think it's that Aula is bad, is the first thing to say. I think that one thing I would pick up on is that he is the god of creation, of building, of new things. The dwarves were his because he had within him this spirit to create new. That was the bit of Eru Ilúvatar's spirit and mind that came to him, this desire to create new things. And that will have gone into the people, the Maiar that worked with him, and that spirit of creating something new, not just being satisfied with what Eru has already got and created, that I think can lead to great and wonderful things, but can also lead to the pride in what you yourself have created. Hence Sauron creating the rings. Saruman also created a ring. So that's my take. Have you got a thought on why did Aula's Maiar go bad?
Yeah, I think it's a cracking question, actually. Really, really good question. So I agree with you. I think it's something to do with Aula is a smith, and then you've got actually his peoples tend to be smiths like the dwarves that he created. And actually, I think the idea that they are smiths, but only Eru Ilúvatar can create life, does create that sense of envy, which, of course, in Aula himself leads to him creating the race of dwarves in secret, right? Because he wanted to create his own thing. It's interesting, actually, that when you look at some of the great characters that fall, they are smiths, actually. So actually Saruman's background, again, as a servant of Aula, Sauron's background, both of them were creating furnaces, weapons of war, they were creating things. Well, what about Feanor? Again, he was somebody who could create stuff. Again, he was somebody who knew how to make fantastic jewels. Again, he met not a great end. Celebrimbor, the guy who works kind of with Sauron on creating the rings, also meets an incredibly grisly end. So there is something about this, and again, I wonder if it speaks to Tolkien himself, because we know Tolkien's aversion to industrialization. What he saw in the so-called Black Country hurt him, and actually, I wonder if that's Tolkien just revealing his inner thoughts. Right, he's not so keen on people building stuff, burning stuff, making things. In that sense, he wants people to live quite peaceful, scholarly, industrial lives. So that would be my take. But honestly, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff. Like something I would really like to give a lot more thought to. So honestly, that's a cracking question. That really is, and I will go away and give it a lot more thought.
Yeah, so thank you. I would also, and I've now gone into Tolkien's views about subcreation as well, but this could take us into completely different areas. So maybe we'll come back to that on another live stream. But thank you for that. Reflective rambling, picking up. Thank you. I love it when you do this. For Michael C. Strachu. I probably horribly mangled your name. I apologize. Will we see parallel timelines or a single linear timeline? I think it's mostly going to be one timeline. I think we will have some flashback. I think we've known we will have some sort of flashbacks or something ever since that first image that they gave us of Valinor and the two trees. And ever since that moment, it's been, okay, so you announced we've got a Second Age show, and then the only bit of information they gave us for months, years even, was a shot, a still not from the Second Age, that was basically trolling us. But yeah, so a single timeline in my view, but we will have flashbacks, we will have other bits and pieces. I mean, is there anything, would you disagree with that one, Shaun?
I wouldn't, and I think it's going to be difficult enough introducing people to a whole new world, all these different realms in it, and all these different characters in it, both some of them that we already knew about, most of them that we didn't. And then doing that across multiple timelines, I think, would make people's heads burst. So I can't see them doing it. I agree. I think single timeline, some flashbacks as appropriate.
Excellent. Just while I think of it, a couple of quick thanks. Moderators, I can see you're doing a fantastic job there in the chat. If you are in the live chat, then please do show the moderators a little bit of love. They do amazing work, just making sure it's all very clean and positive and uplifting space for everybody. So thank you, moderators. Thank you also, patrons. The reason why I prioritize questions from my patrons is because your support allows me to do what I do. So thank you so much. If you are interested in supporting this channel at all, there is a link to my Patreon down in the description. There's also, incidentally, down in the description, a link to the Tolkien Society, which I would highly recommend you go and check out as well. And one other final plug before we move on. We mentioned Isildur a bit ago, which reminded me, I always forget to plug my own videos. Tomorrow, I've decided to go for a clickbaity video, but I think it's an actually important clickbaity title video, but I think it's actually an important point. Isildur did no wrong. My video, we've got a lot of, I made sure, I was wondering what his reaction would be. I feel that the version of Isildur that we saw in the films did not do justice to what happened in the last year of his life in any way, shape or form. And so I just wanted to reassess that and what was the relationship between him and the One Ring. It was not what Peter Jackson's movies showed us. That's my teaser for you. So, and if you're interested in that, the video is coming out tomorrow.
So, Robert, is your next video after that going to be why Sauron was the hero?
No, but that is a good title for getting people. I have done the Lord of the Rings from Sauron's perspective, which is verging on it, but I never. No, it's still there. I always spoil whenever I mention my videos coming out, I always spoil them. The point is that this whole stuff about I was there when the strength of man failed, that's not in the books. That's made up stuff. What actually happened was not that he went off marching with this One Ring ring to sort of, as was implied, to he had this moment. He could have destroyed it, but then he smirked and went away and marched off with his army. Actually, he spent the next year doing really boring things and handing over power. And the reason why he was marching with his army was not to conquer, but to hand the ring on to somebody else, because he realized that he could not control it. Isildur is a much more complicated character than all of that. He wanted to give it to Elrond. Elrond would have destroyed it. That's, I think, why the One Ring slipped from his finger at that time, because it could sense that if he had got to the other side of that river, what was he going to do? He was going to take the ring up to Elrond. And I think that the perception we have of Isildur is wrong, and I think that we need to reassess it. So there we go. And also Sauron was obviously in the right, Shaun. Right, let's go to some questions. So DZ Bank, this is questions in the chat, saying, question for both of you gentlemen. How do you feel about so many original characters? Are they crucial in an already so well-detailed world? Well, I'll start on this one, and then Shaun, I'm sure you've got some thoughts. Just for context, for those who haven't sort of done the adding up, of the 20 whatever it is characters that we've been introduced to, and we're told this is going to be an ensemble piece, so it's not like there's a main character. These are all lots of different characters. Roughly half are canon characters, as in characters that Tolkien wrote about. Roughly half are new. Now, so that's the makeup. The other thing that I would just say by way of context, and I'll just have a quick look back again at what you said, a so well-detailed world. The Second Age is not as well-detailed as, say, the bit at the end of the Third Age. We don't get lots of stories actually in the Second Age, is probably the best way of saying that. We get one, the Mariner's Wife, but in the First Age we get Tolkien writes us some stories like the Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, and so on. In the Third Age we've obviously got Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. The Second Age, yes, he writes the history, but not actually so many stories. So the actual number of characters that we have is probably a lot lower than you might think. That's the context. But Shaun, what's your take? Do we need these extra characters?
Yeah, so I kind of to the question, I kind of almost disagree with the premise of the question, which is I agree with you, Robert. The Second Age is the least well described of the ages. You know, for the First Age we have got the Silmarillion. For the Third Age we have got the Lord of the Rings, and we've got the Hobbit. And actually, the appendices to the Lord of the Rings mostly cover, again, detail of the Third Age. For the Second Age, we've got precious little actual narrative about the world. We've got lots of histories, we've got genealogies as well, but actually the history of the world, what was actually happening in Middle-earth, we've got very, very, very little, apart from, as I said, individual flashpoints. You know, I've got my copy of The Return of the King in front of me, and if you look at the Tale of Years, you will see there are periods of, you know, I think the longest one here is about 400 years where literally nothing is recorded happening. 500 years, there we go, where nothing at all is recorded happening, absolutely nothing. So I do think there was always going to be a need to put in some extra characters. I mean, you just have to do it, because actually even the ones that survive, or even the ones that don't survive, we don't have an awful lot. You know, in a Region, you know, let's say we got Galadriel, let's say we got Gil-galad, let's say we got Celeborn and Elrond, and let's even say we got Círdan. You know, who else? You know, I'm running out of elves, but pretty quickly. We've got Sauron, and then we got, you know, a dwarf king, Durin. Well, who else have we got here? You know, we don't really have the body of characters to sustain the fact that what Tolkien describes is all-out war on, you know, a couple of occasions. So ultimately, we're going to have to see some character development in order to push the story along. Otherwise, it's going to be essentially a few characters just, you know, walking around between different parts of Middle Earth, talking to one another, which is broken up by periods of having a fight with Sauron. So I don't love the idea, frankly, of creating lots and lots of characters just for the sake of it. I want to stay as true to the text as I possibly can, but I have to admit that Tolkien's detail is pretty scantily fleshed out. We do just have to acknowledge that, and we do just have to acknowledge that actually we were sticking to the letter of what Tolkien wrote. You'd have a region with about 5 elves in it because we don't know anybody else who's there. That would be a bit weird. So we do have to acknowledge there would be these extra characters in there. So I do think it's necessary. Whether the number they've created is necessary, I don't know, because I have to acknowledge there seems to be quite a lot there. But again, when we see how those storylines develop on screen, then we'll be able to judge that much, much better. Right now, we're a little bit like judging a cake just by looking at it. Right? We need to try it.
We do, absolutely. And I know, while you were talking about Eregion, I was just thinking Khazad-dûm, the greatest, biggest city ever created. Name me dwarves from that period that aren't called Durin. If you wish to show these places, you have to have extra characters. So this is necessary. It's the extent to which those characters then obviously have to create extra bits of story, and that's the bit that we need to wait on, I think. Flotfair13 saying a bit of bread and honey here before bedtime. Keep tracking, gents. Thank you very much. Lyle Hammock saying, thank you, Lyle, being very generous today, saying, how do you think they will handle the relationship of Celebrimbor and Galadriel? We know there are different versions of her and Celeborn's story. Do you think they will have Celebrimbor overthrow her like in one version? Well, again, the context here is if you go to I don't know whether you've got your copy of Unfinished Tales in front of you, but if you go into that in the bit of it's about the Second Age, there's a section about Galadriel and Celeborn that Christopher Tolkien opens with, and I can't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of, there is no part of the history of Middle-earth that is more confused and contradictory than the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. Once you look at all the different versions, because Tolkien Sr. wrote lots of different versions about what happened with Galadriel, and particularly in the Second and early Third Ages, we're not 100% sure where she was at any particular moment in time, what was going on. There are lots of different versions, so that's the context. And in one of the things, there was certainly Celebrimbor had, I was going to say, a crush, more than a crush, on Galadriel, which led to some tensions. And I think, was that the question? Let me just double check. Do you think they will have Celebrimbor overthrow her like in one version? Yeah, so there's lots of different things. I can't remember whether the showrunners were actually asked. This was something I know a lot of people were intrigued by, this idea as a general principle, because it's not just about this one thing here, and we will answer that specific thing in a moment. But as a general principle, where there are a few different possible versions, how do you decide which one to go to? I'll throw this one to you actually, because I'm sure you've got an erudite answer on this one. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I will do in a moment.
For me, I suspect they will stick. So I suspect it's actually not so much a question of which version of the story they prefer. I suspect this will come down to which version of the story they can legally use. I'm not entirely sure if I'm actually fully clear on what that answer would be in this regard, because the story of Galadriel is, as we all know, very, very complicated. There are multiple different versions of it. What I do think is that Galadriel is one of, if not the most important character we're going to have throughout the whole series. I think a lot of the storyline is going to revolve around her, because she is this. she's elf royalty. She's elf royalty. We know she has this relationship and her role in founding Eregion and Austin Ethel. We know that she was involved, to a lesser or greater degree in terms of the creation of the rings, and that her wisdom and knowledge goes back as far as the existence of the two trees and goes all the way through to when Frodo and the Fellowship have come to Lothlorien. So she is going to be an absolutely crucial character. I think actually, just to broaden this question out a little bit, for me, one of the measures of success of this show is going to be how they deal with her as a character. I think she is so fundamentally important to the story and her role with it, and her relationship with Sauron is the one I think is going to be more interesting. Not the relationship with Celebrimbor. What will her relationship with Sauron be like? How will they depict that on screen? So, and I think she's of such integral importance that I will, when I come to see the show, and I'm thinking to myself, would I recommend this? When I'm writing reviews of it, when I'm asked to do other interviews, it will be with respect of Galadriel that I will often be thinking about my answer, because I think she's so integral to that story.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I think that so thank you for that. I think that the point about rights may well be quite crucial. What they do with, I think she is probably going to be the character who zips around the most, if that's the right way of saying it. I think she's going to be the character who moves around the map probably more than anyone else does. So that, I think, gives them much greater creative freedom to do what they want with her. I think that they definitely will have her being in the region of when the rings were created, when Anatar comes there to start with. I think that her involvement has to be there at some point. But beyond that, this actually, as an aside, does make me think a bit about House of the Dragon on the other side of the stuff that I do, because that's based on Fire and Blood, which, as a book, George R.R. Martin deliberately wrote that book as a sort of an in-world historian, comparing lots of different possible sort of versions of the truth of what actually happened. And in that, they will have to often make decisions about which of these versions of the truth is the right. So this is not, I think, just a unique thing for these showrunners to be tackling. I think this is something lots of different TV shows have to deal with. And I think the reason why we're talking around this a bit, Niall, is in all honesty, and I'll always try and be honest, we do not know on this one. And this is something probably they will have worked through in a reasonable amount of detail before it ever, we ever reach that point in the story. Cloaked One picking up for a question from Mathieu, saying, do you think the show will go into something like a Who Is It for Sauron, as the Wheel of Time did with the Dragon Reborn? Noting that I think it was a bad decision for the Wheel of Time. Well, I mean, so for those who didn't watch the Wheel of Time, who aren't aware of the Wheel of Time, the Dragon Reborn is the great sort of messianic figure. And it's not quite that straightforward. Apologies, Wheel of Time fans. But the season 1, they made quite a big play of who is this person. And so book readers obviously knew who this was going to be, but show-only people didn't. I didn't mind that too much, to be honest. I hear that you didn't like it, but I get that. Will they do something similar with Sauron? I think the answer you might not like is yes, I think. But in reality, it's only ever going to be one of a few characters. Because we have to say that, and it will probably become obvious relatively swiftly who Sauron is, for the simple reason that if we've got 20-something characters, half of them are characters we know. Sauron can't be Galadriel. Sauron can't be Gil-galad. We know all of these kinds of things. So we've only got then these other new characters who possibly could be Sauron, and some of them will relatively swiftly, like the Harfoots or proto-hobbits, whatever, I think it's reasonably certain that they will not, and there are a few other characters that we will very quickly be able to rule out. So yes, I think it will be a bit of a guessing game, but I think it will quite quickly become obvious it's going to be one or two characters. What do you reckon, Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect. Look, I mean, I don't have that high an opinion of the Wheel of Time series, but in terms of Sauron, I think there's going to be an element here that we're kind of not going to be able to. I suspect we may not see Sauron very much, if at all, in the first series, because actually, to your point, Robert, we're going to be able to guess. Those of us in the Tolkien community will probably be able to guess with a fair degree of accuracy down to basically one or two, maybe three people who is Sauron, right? As you say, all the characters that are known about from Tolkien's works, they're ruled out. Or anyone that's a dwarf, anyone that's a hobbit, probably anyone that's an elf effectively gets ruled out as well. So like you're left with a few men, and probably the obvious ones are not going to be the baddie. So we kind of end up getting quite quickly to figuring out who it is, and then what their their reactions and their actions with the elves of a region, what kind of their behavior, what that behavior and that relationship looks like. Again, it's going to start defining quite quickly who that character is, because ultimately you've got to have someone who's going to be maneuvering to a position of creating rings, isn't he, with the elves creating those rings. So that's at some point we're going to have to kind of guess who that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the moment we get somebody who's like starting to approach elves saying, hey, do you want me to teach you some stuff? Then I think that we know who it is. Talking about the rings, Gear says, what about the rings? Tolkien did not explain everything about the rings for men and dwarves. They have to create some part of the story anyway, or what? So I think a reasonable part of this story, halfway in, I don't know when, maybe season 3-ish, will be distribution of the rings, and so we will. I think this is going to be. I'm going to be fascinated by it. Just for those who are sort of unaware in terms of the iteration of events. Again, this is something that I love the Peter Jackson films, but I feel I'm always picking up on them and saying they didn't quite get this bit right. I feel that they kind of gave the impression to a lot of people that Sauron and Celebrimbor created, here's 7 rings that need to go to the dwarves, here's 9 rings that need to go to the humans, and like that. That's not how it was. Sauron with Celebrimbor created the rings of power, then nipped off back to Mordor at the end of his very long con. This was in the books. This was 100 years or more that this took place over. But then, once the elves realized what was going on, they get shut down. And so Sauron's then suddenly left 8 miles away down in Mordor with just his 1 ring. He then has to go and invade in order to get those rings back. The 3 rings that we think of being as the 3 elven rings, they manage to get them out. But the others, Sauron gets, and he then distributes. So it's not like he created 7 rings and we're going to hand these out to these dwarf. The 7 rings were created, and then a bit later he handed them to dwarf lords. So that's the sort of the iteration of things. But just thinking about the distribution, Shaun, have you got any? I mean, I'm really excited about this, but the idea of seeing them go to the future Nazgul and things like that, is this something you've given much thought to?
Well, in the past, yes, like lots of people who are, what is the identity of the 9 bearers of the rings of men and the identity of the 7 dwarves, because actually we basically know next to nothing about who they are. That gives Amazon a massive scope for the distribution of those rings, and how does that story come about? We really don't know. And I've seen. I want to pick up on a couple bits, and I've seen in the chat a lot of people talking about this being a piece of fan fiction and some people kind of not loving the idea of the series. Well, the series in and of itself doesn't override, it doesn't delete, it doesn't change the actual written text by Tolkien. You can still enjoy those. What I would say is, why write off this series without having seen it? As I say, there are some beautiful scenes that I witnessed. We have that fantastic shot of Tyrion upon Tuna with the two trees in the background. That was, as you said earlier, Robert, was for a long time all we really had of the actual show. That image in and of itself is beautiful. Of course, they got to fill in the gaps, right? That's what they've got to do to create a functional series. That isn't changing Tolkien. You can take those gaps away, and the story is still fundamentally Tolkien's story. But ultimately, if people don't like it, just don't watch it. I think, is it? Oh, there you got the lovely image as your background now. Is it fan fiction? Is it not? I think it's kind of almost a philosophical question, really, about what how much changing to an original text takes it from an adaptation to fan fiction. And again, I get, I could very well argue there's sufficient changes Peter Jackson made that makes the Lord of the Rings films a piece of fan fiction rather than an adaptation. And I think many of you may not agree with that perspective, but we're talking a question here. There's not like a line is drawn. There's a scale, right, on how much change you make where you stop considering this as a piece of adaptation and you start considering this as an independent fan fiction. Now that isn't a clear line, and individuals' different lines will be different on that. So I think there seems to be an unreasonable level of hostility, and curiously, sometimes there's some hostility. I'm not saying that I've not seen this in the chat, by the way. The chat is scrolling very fast for me, but from what I've seen on Twitter, there is some hostility from people who seem to be quite comfortable with Peter Jackson having made changes to the storyline in order to make it fit for film, but don't seem very comfortable with J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay making changes to the storyline to make it, or additions to the storyline to make it fit for a TV series.
Yeah, there will, as I say, this is not going to be canon, and that's I'm with you in terms of, is this fan fiction? I mean, all adaptations to one degree or another are fan fiction. This is it. I'm glad that they're fans and they're writing the fiction. So yes, to a certain degree, this is fan fiction, but hopefully it's good fan fiction. Just very quickly, but I just spotted in the chat as it was whizzing past, Callie Summers saying there are a lot of rings of power besides the big 20. Will we see much or any of them in the show? Which is really good point. So I talked about this being Sauron's long con. He didn't just go straight in with that, let's make some huge rings of power. Muhahaha. He came in with a whole load of knowledge, and they created these lesser rings of power. I did do a video on this ages ago if you're interested. But will we see them? I have a feeling that the time compression on this is going to be such that they won't be able to focus on that in any way, shape, or form, other than them making a few prototypes. But the fact that they are out there is pretty indisputable from the fact that this seems to be what Gandalf thought Bilbo's ring was. Because he could see it was a magic ring, and he says this is a ring of power. He didn't seem to initially think that this was the One Ring, but he could see this was a ring that had powers in it, not just invisibility. So yes, they should be there. I would love there to be some random extra rings just floating around, but they are not plot essential. This is not at the heart of it.
Well, I actually wonder, going back to the earlier question about can we identify Sauron? Will there be kind of fake Saurons? Actually, fake rings of power, other magic rings, that could be a mechanism for doing that and waylaying the audience into thinking this guy who's made a ring is Sauron, and oh no, it's him over here. So that could be a mechanism that they use. Again, I don't know. I'm just sort of playing with ideas here.
Yeah, I think we're the possibilities there, and I think one of the things that this is definitely a positive is it does bring a lot of that creativity out in all of us as we're speculating on what might be in there. It's like, what would we do if we were the showrunners in this? Reflective Rambling saying, look at Deep Geek getting all tech savvy on us now. Yeah, it's very rare that I manage to get the technology working, but I'm quite impressed with myself for that slick changeover of the picture behind me. Let's go to some more questions from my patrons. And I think we've answered the questions all about timelines and things like that. Let's go on to one from Betty Morgan saying, I don't know enough to question anything except the Harfoots. Are these the proto-hobbits that the Rohan people spoke of, seeing only briefly from time to time, etc.? You also had a question about the writing, which I'll get onto in just one second. This is quite an interesting point. I did pull up the quote here, which I think is the quote you're talking about, which is something that Theoden says when he meets the hobbits, and he says, all that is said among us I'll start that one again. All that is said among us is that far away over many hills and rivers live the halfling folk that dwell in holes in sand dunes. But there are no legends of their deeds, for it is said that they do little and avoid the sight of men, being able to vanish in a twinkling, and they can change their voices to resemble the piping of birds. So I think that's the reference that you were thinking of there. This was one of the things which caused a bit of controversy, I think, early on. It's probably fair to say the decision to have sort of Hobbit-ish characters in the Second Age. Now, the reason why this was controversial is that there is no record in what we've got of there being hobbits in the Second Age. It kind of makes sense that there were. You're raising your eyebrows. You're going to tell me that all the evidence there is. The hobbits themselves in the Third Age. Obviously, there must have been proto-hobbits of some kind. They must have come from somewhere, so it kind of makes sense. But the idea of there being hobbits in the Second Age was quite controversial. But now, Shaun, you're going to tell me all of the evidence for them.
No, to be fair, you are broadly right.
Excellent, reassuring.
Just I was putting faces. I mean, we don't really know kind of, actually it's one of the things we often talk about, where how Tolkien's created such a world of depth with his languages, his geographies, histories, etc. Actually, one of the things that's really poorly sketched out is the history of the hobbits. So we know basically that they were around the Anduin Valley, near to the Northmen, which is the people that became the Rohirrim, or some of the Rohirrim. We know that they were in the Vales of the Anduin in the early Third Age. So we kind of know that, but broadly speaking, we don't really know kind of where they came from before then. We think that hobbits are almost like a branch of men, but we don't really know that, and we don't really know kind of anything else. One of the things that's interesting, I just want to go on to that point about Harfoots. So Harfoots are not pre-hobbits. That's not how Tolkien described them. It's not like they went from being men to Harfoots to hobbits. Harfoots were one of the three groups of hobbits. You had Harfoots, Stalls, and Fallowhides. So those are the three groups of hobbits that you had. And so I'm slightly curious as to why they've been referred to as Harfoots, because actually I keep referring to them as hobbits, but I know that Amazon refers to them as Harfoots, and I at the moment I don't know why that is the case. Genuinely, I don't know. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, the only origins we've got for the hobbits is their existence early in the Third Age.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is to distinguish them from the hobbits that we know is my best guess. But yeah, they've not come out with a clear and distinctive reason for it. But I hope that that's kind of helped on that. My take is that yes, in terms of the specific question, these proto hobbits, the feeling that we've had from the showrunners, particularly in the Vanity Fair article, is that this is these are the forerunners of the hobbits, and they are not in recorded history because of the fact that they, like that quote from Theoden, they hide away from the big folk. They don't get involved in the politics of the world. They live close to nature, so people just don't pay attention to them. My general feel is that they will be used as our entry point to seeing a lot of the events. So they might not be being the protagonists of events themselves, but they will, and I sort of hesitate to use this analogy, but it may be fair, the kind of the R2D2 and C3PO of this world, which is that they are used as the characters who can go and be anywhere, and we can relate to them, but they are not themselves driving the action. So that's my sort of take on how they're going to be used, and I think that they will. The showrunners will want us to emote with those characters quite quickly, and to feel that they're characters that we can understand and get on the side of quite quickly, I think. Second part of your question was, Betty, was about the language. And you say, I don't doubt for a moment that the show is going to look beautiful. I'm just very worried that these two young showrunners with no experience will be out, and I should probably just say they do have some experience, but they're not massive names and don't have experience of the huge budget things. But worried that they might not be able to write in the master's voice the way that Peter Jackson and his crew did so effortlessly. Quick shout out, by the way, to Philippa Boyens, who we always talk about this as being Peter Jackson's films, but this wasn't just him, and Philippa was often not credited enough, in my view, for coming up with a lot of those excellent speeches and things. But I digress. The point here is that they would say things like, he had an ill-favoured look, which sounds more sort of Tolkienian, as opposed to just like he was ugly. So will they be able to kind of step up, is the question. Now, this is one of those things that, Shaun, your take from the showrunners, because I think this is a confidence issue. And do you, having met them, having spoken to them, having heard they were asked about these kinds of questions, this kind of thing did come up, were you reassured by what they said?
Yes, the first point, because it was one that essentially is about their age, right? And actually, I don't know what you reckon, Robert. I reckon they're probably 40-ish in age, and
ish.
Yeah,
I can Google it.
I have done it myself, and and also trying to work out their career history. That I reckon they're around that age. Peter Jackson was 36 when he started working on the Lord of the Rings films, and he was 40 when the Fellowship of the Ring came out. So that if anything, they're slightly older than Peter Jackson was, and actually they are experienced. They have worked on lots of projects. We obviously know about Star Trek, and there are other ones as well. So I'm not necessarily and bearing in mind that actually Peter Jackson's track record before the Lord of the Rings wasn't necessarily wasn't that glowing as a director. So I kind of don't accept the point that they're not experienced enough, because actually I think they are. The second part of the question was, to your point, do I have the confidence that they get these points, they know how to speak in Tolkien's voice? And time will ultimately tell. We haven't seen a lot of dialogue really so far. I think what they will probably do a little bit what we saw in the Lord of the Rings films, which is, I'm going to guess, they're going to borrow where one character, someone says a phrase, another character might be the one to say it. So, for instance, in Lord of the Rings. A really good example is Treebeard picked up a lot of the language from Old Man Willow and Tom Bombadil. You know, that whole scene, but Treebeard picked that up. I think we might see some of that, which they will use to try to make it feel as Tolkienian as possible, even if it's not necessarily, you know, it may be a quote from Elrond at the Council of Elrond that gets said by Galadriel in the middle of the Second Age, for instance. So I think they will do things like that. I do have confidence that they understand what Tolkien language feels like. This, as you said, this did come up in the questioning. I was reassured by their answer that they get it, and we're not gonna stray too far away from that. As I said, that is actually, that's not about them. That's just about being a good writer, and there are people that we know, people that some of you may know, who do novelizations of TV series, of films and stuff. And actually, that's just a skill that you get good at, right? Just knowing how to speak in someone else's voice. So that, and to my point, I mentioned this well over an hour ago. They are not necessarily the writers. They are writers. Again, we know some of those who've worked on some of the individual episodes, who do this for a living.
Yes, and I think the thing I would add is it needs to be said as many times as possible. This Amazon's budget knows no bounds on this, and also their attention to detail knows no bounds. They are throwing everything at this. Now, what that means is that this is not just two guys who are in charge of everything. Far from it. They have hired people to do absolutely every single thing. There will be people there who are language experts. I know that they've got language experts going on there. I wouldn't focus on just the showrunners. I was also reassured by what they said in terms of their response to questions like this. But I would say they will have people there who are paying attention to this kind of thing. One thing which I think we're now far enough into this that I doubt any Amazon people are watching all the way into this, so I will sort of say it's something slightly naughty. But one thing that they did say which reassured me was a lot about the feel of different peoples and cultures and the languages that brings with it. And there was a very clear understanding of the way that dwarves will talk differently to elves, who will talk differently to hobbits and things like that. And that is a very important point that I think it bears saying. One of the wondrous things about Tolkien's writing is that when you first read The Lord of the Rings, almost everybody notices the amount of songs and poetry in it. It's really only on, I think, for some people on the second or third time through that you notice that they're all in completely different styles depending on who wrote it. If you read something that Sam has come up with or Bilbo has come up with, the sentence structures that are completely different to an Elven poem, and that level of understanding is what came through in terms of the showrunners. Whether that translates to the screen, I can't say because I've not seen it. But certainly the level of understanding is there. So I hope that provided some degree of reassurance. Lyle Hammock saying, final question. Thank you again, Lyle, saying, do you think we will get to see much of Harad? One of the characters is from a village called Tir Harad, which sounds like a Numenorian outpost in Harad. I would love to see more of that land. Yeah, I think I also had a question from one of my patrons, or actually, no, this was... I will find it in a bit. But so I had somebody else who's asking about where we're going to see in this. Shaun, what's your take? Are we going to see areas further to the south or east than we have done in previous sort of adaptations of the Lord of the Rings? Are we going to see Harad?
I very much hope so. I mean, I don't know for certain. I think it would be a shame not to, actually, because again, one of the benefits of doing this this series at a time when we know very little is it gives actually the creators of the show an awful lot of space in order to create stories. And actually, I just want to follow on a little bit more, because one thing that of Tolkien scholars and readers have often wondered is about the relationship of Numenorians with the people of Middle-earth. Was their relationship one of colonialists to a certain extent? When they were building these outposts in Middle-earth, was that in? And then, of course, they themselves lost their land and basically became migrants into Middle-earth. Is that dynamic going to play out? Again, I've got no idea at all. But because if we did, we would see that certainly in the south, in Harad. I hope we see the East. I suspect we will. The reason why I suspect we will is if you roll your mind back to the very, very first things that we had, which was the maps. And the maps depicted more of the East, with, from memory, a mountain range further to the east that we don't usually, which isn't on the conventional maps by Christopher Tolkien. So that makes me suspect we probably are going to get storylines over there. And I wonder if they're going to converge as the series goes on.
I mean, that would be excellent. I mean, one other pardon me, one other thing that might hint that we could see the East is the only named Nazgul, or which presumably this was his name before he was given the ring, Khamul the Easterling, which seems to imply that he was from the East. So if we are going to see the distribution of these rings, then presumably we will see one given to him. So the context there, I think that was really fascinating when you were talking about the relationship between Numenor and Harad. This could be one of the things that I fear they could, if not lose in time contraction, then we would certainly miss out on a lot of the detail and nuance of this, because the high-level Numenorian history, it sort of grows and they start becoming a seafaring nation, and they start by doing little outposts, and then those outposts turn into fortresses, and the fortresses turn into cities, and they claim lands, and basically Numenor expands its territories out. And then as Numenor then starts becoming much more insular and it falls, we're left with all of these, and they become known as Black Numenorians, effectively, these sort of outpost lands that are no longer connected to Numenor because Numenor is no longer there, which is an astonishing kind of dynamic that it plays out particularly with Gondor's history all the way through the Third Age, is the relationship with these Umbar and Harad and places like that we've heard of, and in our mind, our Third Age minds, they're just sort of these slightly strange places off the main bit of the map that come in and attack Gondor every now and then, and that's because of the huge history that's come before them. So are we going to get all of that? I hope we get at least some of it, but it could be the kind of thing that could get missed out in the timeline contraction.
Yeah, and on top of that, of course, going in the south, we have what's called the Black Numenorians, which are people who were the king's men in Numenor. That's it. They were loyal to Alpharazon, and they then, when in Middle Earth, they became what's called the Black Numenorians, and then from then you've got the ideas of the Corsairs, etc., come from those people further south. Will we see that dynamic? Because of course, when Sauron goes to war, he gathers people from the south, the Black Numenorians, on his side. Will we see that play out? Because actually, when you look at Lord of the Rings films, it was essentially men and elves against orcs and Sauron. But actually, are we going to see men fighting men? Are we going to have a situation where we're going to have, Isildur, Elendil fighting people that they know on the side of the Black Numenorians for Sauron? Again, that is something we could see. That might be quite an interesting dynamic.
It definitely would. And seamlessly, we have a question from one of my... This is Lyle was asking a question also over on Patreon about Numenor and Alpharazon. So what is your opinion will be the story that we see the most of such as Numenor, or will they all receive equal time? And which character are you most eager to see? For me, it's Pharazôn. I'll kick off on this in terms of the timing. I think we've got 5 different. Don't ask me to count them up, but I think 5 different bases of story that we're going to be having across here, and I think we will see all of them roughly equally, but then there will be some points later on, particularly Numenor, will become a lot more important when the Sauron comes into Numenor. That's going to be a huge amount of the focus of what's going on. So I think it will vary, but I don't think it's going to be just one place as the main hub and lots of other things. Pharazôn is going to be a fascinating character. For those who don't know, he is the last king of Numenor, and he's the one who let Sauron in, basically. And it's pretty much his fault that the whole thing goes belly up. We can probably blame Sauron, but he's a fascinating character. I am really looking forward to seeing him. I think we will see him, from what we've been told so far, all the way from season 1. So we're going to be picking up. Maybe it won't be maybe he won't be king at the time, but he will be as a character all the way there from season 1, take us through presumably to the season 4-ish. But what do you reckon on that, Shaun? Are you particularly excited about anything in Numenor?
So there's a couple of things. First of all, I'm quite excited to see the landscapes of Numenor. Actually, so one of the things that we do have, Amazon, we believe, don't have the rights to it, but we have a very clear description of the Isle of Numenor in the Unfinished Tales. It'd be interesting to see how they depict that. I would really like to see what the cities look like and how do they compare with some of the cities and designs we've seen of towns and cities and realms of men in Middle-earth. But actually, the character I most want to see is Miriel. I think that's absolutely fascinating. She's a fascinating character. She's got, she's the daughter of the previous king. Her cousin essentially usurps the throne, forces her into marriage in order to kind of bolster his claim. That's what Alpharazon does. And she is secretly loyal to the faithful. That is the men who are kind of loyal to the Elves and the Valar, as opposed to the King's Men that aren't by this point. But she also drowns in the downfall of Numenor, and I think the character arc she goes on is going to be really very, very interesting. And I suspect in latter seasons, maybe it's going to be season 3, season 4, she's going to become quite a crucial character, and in terms of her personality being shown through. And actually, that's one of the points I want to make about this TV series compared with the Lord of the Rings films. This TV series has got 50 hours of content, 5 seasons, 10 episode seasons, each of an hour-ish each. That was, the Lord of the Rings films was between 9 and 11 hours, depending on the edition that you're watching. There is a lot more time to scope out these characters. You mentioned earlier about Merry and Pippin, where they basically just randomly turn up in the story with very little character development for them. We don't have that. We've actually got a lot more opportunity here to see how these characters develop, and Miriel is going to be one of those. We're going to see some of the pain, some of the anguish, some of the hope that she's going to have, and what that ends up in. In terms of different regions, I suspect it might be a little bit like, a couple of episodes might focus in one place, the next couple might focus somewhere else. They're going to have to find a way of threading them all. So I suspect they're all going to have to appear pretty much as things are happening most of the time in most of the episodes. But I suspect we might have it feels. I wonder if they're going to go for an approach which is slightly episodic, which is like this episode is going to focus on this character in this place. This episode is going to focus on this character in this case. And then this episode is going to bring these two things together.
Yeah, that could work. I mean, I've imagined it, and I don't know. This might just be because of my background, but I've imagined it being a bit like Game of Thrones, where they're sort of like progressing lots of storylines at the same time, and just assuming that the viewer can keep up there, so you can have things happening in 4 or 5 different places in one episode, and that means that each individual story might only move forward a little bit in each episode, but the narrative as a whole can move forward. But I mean, yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see on that. Certainly they seem to be having a lot of different discrete stories that we will be picking up on in the first 2 or 3 episodes. Question from Callum Barnes. I think this was a super chat actually before we came live. Thank you, Callum. Saying, question around Isildur and the Men of Dunharrow. I've not seen anyone talk about this. However, I feel that it would be a great plot point for the show, showing them pledge their oath, breaking it, then Isildur cursing them. Thoughts? Yeah, so this is the dead, for those who don't know it, the dead men of Dunharrow. You will have seen them in the Lord of the Rings films. Well, if you saw the extended versions, certainly those ghostly figures that Aragorn goes through the paths of the dead, and he summons them to fulfill their oath. There's a big backstory to this. The reason why he can effectively command them, why they will follow him, is because they are the oath breakers. They are the people who swore fealty to Isildur right at the very end of the Second Age. And then when he said, hang on a moment, Sauron's now coming, they broke their promise. They broke their oath. And then Isildur cursed them that they had to fulfill their oath and they would not be free until they fulfilled their oath. I personally agree. I think that would be a fantastic thing when we're trying to plot out this imaginary 5th season of it, where this is all after Numenor's gone and we're building up to the last alliance. That would make for an excellent little subplot there, where Isildur's trying to build his alliance of people against Sauron. He thinks he's got the support of these guys, but they suddenly turn their back on him. That would make for a great little sequence. Shaun, have you got any thoughts on the dead men of Dunharrow?
So I think this is a really good question. I've got the opposite approach actually, because although they pledge their allegiance to Isildur, they get cursed. We don't see the outcome of that curse. You know, I think in that sense, that's going to be like a thread slightly unresolved by the end of the series. So I'm not fully convinced whether they will do it, because actually you're just going to see him curse a bunch of men. And then what? Actually, in terms of this series, nothing, because it's only once they die, they lose their bodies, etc. They be living on forever. They're just living as men at this point. So I'm less convinced about whether that's going to be a useful visual thing on screen. It's just going to be a little bit of a side story. Him going off to these men. Do you want to fight with me? No. Okay, then you're cursed. Bye. Is that gonna work? I don't know.
It sounds so dull. I think that sounds great. As a sort of a counter argument, I think towards the end of season 5, this is building up to that point where it's the handing over to the stories that we know in the Third Age, the story of the One Ring, the Lord of the Rings, and I think this is a nice little setup that they can do to link in with what happened at the end there. So I think that they would like to, or at least I would if I were in their position. The issue is, how can you make that, as you say, dramatically exciting? And I think that it's the betrayal that is the thing, rather than the curse. Is the if you have in episode 1 or 2 these people swearing fealty to Isildur, and him feeling as if he can withhold, he can stand against Sauron because he's got the support of all of these people, and then suddenly his supporters all drain away, including these ones who swore to support him. And if that leaves him in such an anguished state that he then curses them, that I think would, and then he has to flee off, as we know that he does, north and west to try and get help from his dad and the elves. So that for me works, because we have to build up to that situation where he heads off to seek help from the last alliance of elves and men. Let's go for a question from 444 saying, what do you think about the impact on the Rings of Power of the global pandemic? So far, 2 big fantasy shows were heavily affected by production restrictions. For The Witcher, they planned to have scenes with many people that were abandoned, like feasts and battles. Some locations were built in the studio instead of filming externally. For Wheel of Time, 6 episodes were filmed, then they had to wait and do 2 more, and then they had to do a whole load of CGI Trollocs, I remember, rather than actual real people, which led to quite some criticisms because it didn't look as good. So as a sort of a question, how has this affected production? Will this affect the quality of what we see? I will be very interested in, Shaun, in your take on this. My take is I don't think we will notice it on this, simply because Amazon are throwing everything at it. They are, we know they've got a huge budget. They were in New Zealand, which was the least hit of all of the sort of possible places they could go. They were sort of in a very sealed location. We didn't hear of lots of people going down with COVID there. And add to all of that, they had a really unique filming schedule to start with anyway, which was that they were going to film the first 2 episodes and then take a break of 5 months and then come back and film the other episodes. That was always going to be their plan. As it happened, they filmed almost 2 episodes, and then COVID happened and they had to call everything off. And then after 6 months or so, they got the all clear to carry on going. So they just came back, finished doing what they were doing before, and carried on. So the actual impact, I think, is not going to be huge. When you add into that the, I would say ridiculously long, very, very long, 13 months of post-production, I think if there were any issues, they will have ironed them out. 13 months, just for comparison, for those who are aware, Game of Thrones, when it was on a regular yearly cycle, that had a 5-month post-production turnaround time. The kinds of things we've seen recently, The Witcher's got a 7 months, both times it did 7 months post-production time. I think The Wheel of Time had something like 5 or 6 months. That's the sort of realms that we're normally in. The Rings of Power have given themselves an extra half year on top of everything else of the same kind of scale. So I personally don't think we're going to see any issues. But Shaun, do you think we're going to have any impact on quality?
No, I can't see them, and certainly, from the footage that I saw, there's no evidence that there was that impact. I think there's going to be a more interesting question, though. So, although those of us in the Tolkien community will probably look at this TV series through the prism of how it compares with Tolkien's works, and some of those questions that we talked about already today, actually, a lot of the press will be covering this through the prism of Amazon versus Netflix versus HBO versus Disney, right? And how Amazon are using Lord of the Rings on Prime, Lord of the Rings of Power, in their battle against those. Now, actually, I think that is quite interesting, because there are 2 schools of thought, right? Right now, we know that Netflix has got declining subscribers, although we also know that Disney has got increasing subscribers. Now, does that mean that now is a bad time to release a new TV show, because we know that the general economic climate is quite poor? We know that one of their main competitors is struggling. We all know the issues in various countries with inflation, with unemployment, etc. Right? So does that mean that, and this is, of course, this is all happening because of the last 2 years of the pandemic, right? So does that mean this is now a bad time to release a TV series? Or because lots of the other studios have similarly struggled with producing stuff in the last 2 years and making content, and we have had, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a fallow period recently on some of those big blockbustery type shows on streaming services, Does this mean that actually they're releasing it at a really good moment where they can capitalize on the Rings of Power and push forward? Because ultimately what they want is Prime subscribers, right? They want to put Prime on the map. They want people to buy Prime memberships, and they want to use Lord of the Rings as a reason to do so. I actually don't know the answer to this question. I can argue the toss both ways, but I think actually in terms of the pandemic, has that had an impact on the quality of the show? Not that I can see. Will it have an impact on whether the show and as a result Amazon's successful? It might do, and we don't yet know about that. And I think that's the way the press are going to approach this. That's going to be one of their questions: is how are they using Lord of the Rings to be successful?
Yes, and I think just trying without diving too deep into the industry, I think the way that Amazon marks its own success is different from how other people mark their own success, because Amazon is a much bigger company, obviously, than just a company that makes TV shows. They see this as an entry point for if people subscribe to Amazon Prime because they want to watch Tolkien, that means that they might be able to sell them more whatever books or something. So that's their thinking is actually a slightly different level to lots of the other streaming services. The only other thing I was going
to say, and you're right. Amazon is the world's biggest bookseller. Like let's not forget that. Regardless of whether any of us herein like the TV series or not, this will shift copies of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, etc. That is a good thing for Tolkien fandom, and ultimately that'll be a good thing for Amazon as well, because actually they may not necessarily just need Prime memberships. As to your point, they may just need people buying lots of books.
Yeah, exactly, and I imagine it will be excellent business also for the Tolkien Society, or at least I hope it will. But that's your membership, I suspect, probably will get a boost if there is a boost in interest in these things. The other thing in terms of quality, I would just say, I know there were a couple after the teaser trailer that we had. There were a couple of people who thought that the graphics were a little bit shonky, some of the CGI. That escaped my eye, I have to admit. That's not the kind of thing that I really look for. But what I can say is that people who were at the screening the other day, the general feeling was any of those issues were no longer there. It looked very, very good. So I think that we don't need to worry about the quality. They're spending the time and the money to make sure that it works. Reflective Rambling, thank you. Pick up question for Ian Kaplinsky. Will we see any battles in season 1? Interesting. So the teaser trailer did have a shot of a battle. It has to be said. There was, if you remember, there was an elf-like character surrounded by lots of other elf-like characters with lots of fire and things in the background in what looked to be a battle. That I suspect was a flashback. Will there be any battle? I can't. It's possible, because they're obviously making up new storylines, so they might create new battles here and there. But it's possible that we won't see any big battles, because this is the sort of the peace and calm before the storm coming. I think that we will have a flashback battle or two. I think that they have to show a little bit about what happened at the end of the first age to explain what is going on in the second age, and there might be a few rumblings around the sort of the Numenor and in the south area, but broadly speaking, the elves aren't going to war in season 1. The dwarves aren't going to war in season 1. If there is, it's going to be minor skirmishes to the south. Can you think of any battles we might be having?
No, I agree. I think, will there be fighting? Yes. Will there be battles? Probably not, I suspect. And also, you think from a narrative point of view, one of the problems in the Lord of the Rings films, right, is having done the Battle of Helm's Deep, is Peter Jackson then had to do the Battle of Pelennor Fields and then the Battle of the Black Gate, right? And it becomes harder for you to ramp up that tension. They've not got 3 films here. They've got 50 episodes they've got to get through. I suspect bringing out the big, massive battle scenes early on actually dilutes the impact of some of those big, massive battle scenes later on, which is one of the sort of weird things about the Lord of the Rings films, right? The Helm's Deep actually feels like the most significant battle of the film trilogy, because it's actually the one that has the most screen time, because actually it was basically a bit of a filler for the second film, whereas actually the most significant battles happen in the third film, but have significantly reduced time allocation compared with the Battle of Helm's Deep. And so that they're going to have to think very, very carefully if they're going to introduce battles. How do you do them in such a way that you're going to want to have the battle of the War of the Last Alliance in Series 5. That's got to be the big battle, right? That has got to be the big thing. So you're going to almost work backwards from that and downwards from that.
Yeah, I agree. That's the big battle we have. We'll also have Sauron will go invading and take over Eregion to capture the rings, and then also we get Numenor going in and attacking Mordor and taking Sauron prisoner. So there are battles which happen later on, but not. I suspect we won't have a big battle in season 1. Factory Rambling saying it's just asking about my Audible coupon yet. So Audible sponsors some of my videos. If you want to just help out a bit, if you are going to get something from Audible, watch the video tomorrow about Isildur, which is clearly going to change Sean's mind about Isildur's character, and at the end of it, you will get the little code there as well. So that's coming out tomorrow. Have I caught up on the chat? I think I've caught up on questions in the chat. So let's go to another question from Lyle Hammock. This is over on Patreon, asking, what is your opinion on the theory that the broken black blade is Gurthang or Anglakal, and what are the implications for the story? Okay, so let's see. I'm going to try doing something clever. Oh, hang on. Hey, there we go. Right. So this is what we're talking about. This is the sword. There's also another image, which was, if you remember, the hands image, where we had all of those hands images. The same character holding the same sword. Now, Sean, I saw shaking his head, so I shall give the context first before he shoots all of this down. I did a long Twitter thread about this a week or so ago. This is a broken sword that the light's shining on it here, but in the other picture certainly looked black. So we have a broken black, cool-looking sword, and there are black swords in Tolkien's Legendarium, and there is indeed one cool ancient broken black sword in particular that has a central role in the First Age in the story of the Children of Húrin, and this is called Gurthang. It was part of a pair. It was forged from a meteor, and it is without doubt. Do go and investigate, because this is a really cool sword. It is epic. It is. It has a personality. It has sort of flames coming from it, and it speaks at the end. It's astonishing sword. That sword was buried with its final owner, Turin. It was broken and it was buried with him. And it was buried in a bit of land that at the end of the First Age was submerged in water. However, we do know that the specific hill on which that wasn't drowned. So there's the possibility, theoretical at least, that maybe somebody rode to that island, dug up the sword and brought it back. Is it possible? Who knows where the showrunners are going with this? The implications would be quite significant, because this is, as I say, this is we could probably, it's it's simplifying it hugely, but this is a cursed sword, effectively. Bad things happen to people who have this sword. If this isn't Gurthang, then this is another black, cool-looking, broken sword that the showrunners have invented for this very purpose. So if it isn't that, then it's something that they have invented that is very similar. But Shaun, you were shaking your head at that. You think this isn't Gurthang.
Well, I think it at least it shouldn't be, right? Because at that point, so first of all, I don't think Gurthang is somebody, you know, if Digital Tolkien were here, he'd be able to check for me. I don't think Gurthang features in the Lord of the Rings text, so therefore I don't think they have the right to use it anyway. But notwithstanding that, if you introduce a sword like this, there's got to be a reason for why, and I didn't really understand the reason why, because although it's a sword, you know, also that sword there, it looks cool, but it looks like an obviously evil sword. The way Gurthang is described isn't an obviously evil sword. It's used by both. You know, the sword has a history with elves and with men. It's just a you know, a blade of meteoric iron, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't it's not been made by evil, you know, orcs or anything. But also, what would be the purpose of introducing that sword? You know, the only comparison we've got in Tolkien's works would be Narsil, which then becomes Anduril. You know, the Flame of the West, the sword that Aragorn has. You know, that sword has a kind of it's an heirloom. It has a symbolic meaning as Aragorn approaching taking the kingship of Gondor. What would be the symbolic meaning of this sword? You know, it killed its owner several thousand years ago. Like I don't really understand what function it's doing. And the problem is introducing a sword like that will then become too big a distraction, I think. So I'm not really sure what the purpose is of it, in order to kind of like some kind of little bit of a, oh, this is from the First Age, guys. Wink, wink, wink. But I don't really see a function for it. I suspect the sword, you know, it looks to me like it's kind of like a Nazgûl type sword, right? So I wonder if that's where that might be heading in that direction. I don't know, but I think they've not got the rights to Gurthang. But even if they are going with it, I think it's just a big distraction, and a bit of an unnecessary one. You know, I don't really understand why you need to do that. And again, to my point earlier, it takes away from the, you know, that's something else you've got to try to explain at this point, right? Because in order to explain that sword, you've got to explain the history of Turin, right? And you can't really do that. All of a sudden, you've got a whole like background story just for a sword. Like, that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of screen time just for that. So personally, I really hope they don't do that, I have to say.
Well, I mean, I think we've agreed on a lot in this live stream. I think on this, I would really like it to be Gurthang. I think that would be actually, for me, it would be a really cool little tie into the First Age. And I love that sword so much. I just think I would love to see it in action. But I'm 50-50 as to whether this is. I can see the argument either way. If it's there, then what would they use it for? Well, to lead somebody starting off down a dark path. That could be. We've got lots of people who will have to go down a dark path.
But the sword doesn't make people evil.
It does not make people evil, but it leads them into tragedy and disaster. And tragedy and disaster can lead people down a dark path. So I like the idea. Maybe it's just because I love this sword and I think it's great, and I think it's the inspiration for a lot of great fantasy swords in Elric and characters like that. So I think that it would be great. I do think the other possibility is what you sort of briefly mentioned there, the idea of this being sort of a proto-Morgul blade.
Yeah.
I think that the idea that what we had was the First Age, where we had the height of not just, you know, many good civilizations, but the height of Morgoth's bad civilization. He was inventing new stuff all the time. He was inventing dragons and things like that. So the idea that maybe he had started creating these kind of Morgul blades works perfectly well. And the idea that maybe the Morgul blades that we get to see in the Third Age come from some earlier technology works really well for me. So it could be a sort of either of those things. So when I say 50,
I just think you like it because it is like that nice connection to the First Age.
I do,
and that's why I don't like it. I think it's kind of shoehorning it in there. I saw somebody in the chat, I think it was Mark, said that he wants to see Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, and I'm absolutely 100% with him on that. That is absolutely a weapon that I do want to see. And I thought it was a real shame that actually Peter Jackson took out more Gil-galad scenes, right? We had such a brief clip. We basically had one shot of Gil-galad going with his spear in the prologue, and that was it. I thought it was a real shame. I really want to see Gil-galad spearing orcs all over the place. I think, no pun intended there. I'd really like to see that. I think that'd be good fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's worth saying. So that spear was as famous and feared in its day as Anduril Narsil was. It was and Gil-galad as a fighter, we don't. I mean, he's kind of been sort of washed from our memories because he's not in the Third Age, but he was the High King effectively in reality, and he was there and he led armies into battle. He had a famed weapon. He should be astonishing to see in full flow. So yeah, I think we will see it. But it's on that list of things that they might not include, but I see no reason why they wouldn't include it unless it's a rights issue. We always come back to this rights issue. The showrunners were more relaxed about it than I suspect we were. But there you go. Okay, let's go to. I've got a few more. I've got to three. Lyle again saying, do you think we will see Pharazon laying his groundwork for his coup in season 1? I think he will use the fact that Tar Palantir has withdrawn from public life, as we know he did towards the end of his reign, and Miriel, his daughter, is inexperienced. It would be the perfect time to do it and would add some palace intrigue. Do you agree? Yeah, I think we sort of covered this one already, so I won't go over this again in any detail. Yeah, I think probably we will come and we will have that as a sort of the main Numenor plot in part of season 1, would be my guess. Also, I think this was a super chat before we went live, saying, could you please expand on Finrod, especially for those unfamiliar with the deeper lore? I feel this would be helpful as his influence will be in this series heavily. Also, what do we know about the east and south of Middle-earth at this time? Well, we've talked a bit about the east and south already, but we can talk about Finrod. So Finrod's not alive, is the first thing that we have to say in the Second Age. So Finrod has died by this point, but he is an important character. Finrod is Galadriel's brother, one of her brothers. He is there. He comes across with her when the Noldor come to Middle Earth. He's there, going sort of effectively across the North Pole. Lots of the elves die at that point. I think we read that he's at the rear and he's the person who's there keeping everybody going at the back. When he arrives over in Middle Earth, he plays a very full and active role. A couple of very important points for him, 3 important points, let's say. Firstly, he's the person who discovers and befriends men, humanity. This is really important because he taught them how to speak Elvish. They taught him their tongue, and that led to the relations between elves and men that we see playing out in the First Age that leads on to the creation of Numenor. He is an absolutely pivotal figure in that history. Secondly, he ruled over Nargothrond, so he was one of their 3 or 4 big elven settlements. during the First Age. That fell and was destroyed, as they all were. So that was one of his other things. And thirdly, he plays a crucial role in the story of Beren and Luthien. This is where his death comes. So he is a central character. And what role will he have in this? Well, he's not there, but I think all the hints we have are that this is going to be one of the driving forces for Galadriel. She was close to him. We read in the First Age she spent a lot of time with him. And so that will be a sort of a vengeance for him, would be an important driving force for her. So that's my take on Finrod. Is there anything you'd want to add on to that?
Yeah, so that I think in the context of this story, you're right. Finrod is Galadriel's older brother. He was the king of Nargothrond, as you say. He took part in the exile of the Noldor from Valinor. But I think there's two key points that relate to this story. So the first one is, you already touched on. He was killed by Sauron at Tol in Galhoth, which is the Isle of Werewolves. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which again is why he might be significant in this story, is the Ring of Barahir comes from Finrod. He gives that to Barahir as a sign of the friendship. You mentioned that relationship between Finrod and men. That ring comes from there, which we know becomes an heirloom through the House of Beor, down through the Numenorians, and gets carried back to Middle Earth, and eventually is with Aragorn. So that ring, going back to that point earlier where we talk about objects with symbolic symbolic value, that ring is one such object. So I wonder if that is going to be part of that story we see with Finrod, might be about that ring and that ring passing down. And then, as you mentioned, his death at the hands of Sauron. Is this going to be something Galadriel cannot get over? What for me is more curious is if they are going to go down that route. She had two other brothers that died, right, in Angrod and Ignor. Like, are we gonna see them as well? Because because at the moment we don't seem to have any hint about them. We seem to have this hint about Finrod. We don't seem to have any hint about them. That for me is slightly odd. She's got two other brothers that she apparently doesn't seem to care about. This one she really does. So that's something else that I think is a bit curious to me.
Well, from a filmmaking perspective, I kind of understand that, because if they're going to be like, tell us about your family, Galadriel, not just I've got lots of these, let me tell you about all my brothers and all the different ways that they died, and let me tell you about all the people that I left in Valinor. I mean, this is not, it will work a lot better if it's just, oh, my dear beloved brother, and then we get the backstory, and that drives her. If you're wondering why we're talking about sort of hints about Finrod, so behind me, hang on, let's work out which way we go. That character there that you see, there was lots of discussion. I don't think we've had any formal confirmation, formally confirming anything, but the favourites for who that might be have always been Galadriel or Finrod. And then we also I talked briefly about that shot from the teaser trailer where you had an elf character there who he had fair hair, and I think his armor was very Noldorin. The thinking was that looks, if it's anyone, that could again be Finrod. So the hints are there, and obviously of all of the elves of the First Age, which are humans going to be remembering, this guy who actually was the first to make contact with them. So the hints are there that Finrod will have some backstory role rather than actually a place in this story. But I think the Sauron killed him, and therefore Galadriel's got history with Sauron and is important. So and again, context for those who are not 100%. At the end of the First Age, Sauron was on the losing side, and at first he sort of seemed to like go, okay, well, I'll surrender, I give up, I'll be contrite. But then he changed his mind and he hid. I think the words were hid in Middle Earth. And during that period, we don't know anything about him. But everyone who would have been around at that time, people like Galadriel, will have known. Also, of course, we've got other characters who absconded, like the Balrog that we know as Durin's Bane. There are lots of these kind of characters, and what we're told about Galadriel in that Vanity Fair article is that she's hunting down the remnants of Morgoth's army. That's what we're told that she's doing. So she's got a beef with Sauron. That is going to be a spark of this story, because we don't know who Sauron's going to be in this. She doesn't know who Sauron's going to be, but somewhere out there is Sauron. So that, I think, is one of the key hooks of season 1.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just say, because I saw there was a comment in the chat from Mark saying Finrod with short hair is a big no-no. I just want to say, if you're sticking to Tolkien's works, there's no reason why he can't have short hair. There are some characters Tolkien describes with long hair. He doesn't describe all elves as having long hair. Certainly not all Mare elves having long hair. And in fact, there's many good artists. One of my favourite is Yenny Dolphin, who often depicts elves with short hair, and they look fab. So I've got no issue with it at all. It certainly isn't something that Tolkien specified. If you prefer them with longer hair, that's cool. But I just wanted to make that point, because this one comes up a lot. And there's no reason. There's nowhere in Tolkien's work that he say all elves have long hair. They just don't.
Yeah. There's also, as a random thing, no point in Tolkien's work where he says that elves have got pointy ears, but that's an entirely different thing. I think we understand. I agree with you, though. I've got no problem with elves with short hair. It's not a thing that Tolkien was very strong on. I've got one more question from my patrons. So this is a good chance. If you've got any other final questions, this is a good point to drop them into the chat. But this is a great question, Shaun. I'm sure you've got a great answer to this one. This is Eric Broden saying, "Hi Robert, I always wondered, did the One Ring make Sauron stronger? It is said that he put his own soul into it to make it powerful. One would assume that if he put 50% of his power into it, he would keep 50% and have 50% in the ring, but still total 100%. Or does the ring somehow amplify the power so that he would be on 150%, say, when he was wearing the ring?" So hit us with this one.
Yeah, so the nature of the ring is something many Tolkien scholars have asked questions about, and there are lots of different types of views. The ring, so to some people, the ring isn't a way of like leveling up Sauron. It is almost like it's kind of like a special power, which is the special power to project himself and take control of other people's other minds and other rings, right? That's the kind of the generally kind of how people see it. It's not so much that it increases his power per se, but to your point, it more kind of focuses it, so he's able to dominate others, right? So that's the kind of the first theory. The second theory is almost like he poured all his power into it, and it essentially basically doubled his power, right? Because we know even without the ring, when he was in Numenor, he presumably didn't have the ring, because otherwise it would have been destroyed in the downfall of Numenor. But he was still a powerful guy, right? So it's when he's got the ring on with him, there's this view that he's kind of almost doubled his power, right? The third view, and this is the one I quite like, I would like it to be true, right? Because this is the one that kind of ticks Shaun's like Tolkien nerdy lore box, which is when the world was created. Arda, for those of you who don't know, it's specified in the Silmarillion. The world was created in music, in song, and Morgoth, and as is them known as Melkor, his music, his song was discordant with the others, And that was embedded in the world, right? The world was created with that in it. And then when the Valar came into the world, once it was created, it was, as the term that's used is Arda marred, right? He marred it. It's now imperfect, and his evil is literally embedded in the earth. There is a view that the ring basically enables Sauron to channel the evil inherent in the world, and I quite like that one because it's a bit like your point about Gurthang. It tidies up quite nicely that idea of the creation of the world, which would also partly explain why the Valar saw Sauron and the Ring as so significantly evil that they were willing to grant Frodo, Bilbo, and potentially others passage to the west. Because actually what Sauron was doing, he wasn't just making his power, him being able to focus his power to project it, but actually he was channeling the power of Morgoth in the world. So that's quite a nice idea. I'm not necessarily saying that's right. Generally, people sort of take the view it's more kind of gives him a special ability, which is to dominate. But the idea that the ring enables him to channel the evil in the world of the kind of residual Morgoth's power, I really like that idea. Probably the chat is going to go mad at just my various theories that I've just presented. But I didn't give just one answer. I gave 3 different answers there.
I mean, I liked all of them. I think I'm with you. I love that idea of the third one. I think there is somewhere. Gandalf says, "I wish I could come up with a quote where Gandalf does say that he would be more powerful with the ring." Which does seem to imply that this isn't just it's not like a Horcrux thing with Harry Potter, when Voldemort puts part of himself into there. That is clearly inspired by the One Ring, but it's not that kind of thing where he's just dividing himself. Yes, he pours himself into it, but when he has it on, he definitely has some of the first stuff you were saying about the ability to control others, which then that boosts his own power. And that was his cunning plan, basically, to start with. Let's make these rings. The elves can wear them. I can then control the elves, and I'll be in charge. That was the cunning plan. But there is something more in there. There's something more evil and powerful to do with that ring that is never fully explained. And the idea of Morgoth's ring, because being the earth, the discordant note within the world, that definitely works for me.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, let's just have a quick flick through. Robert Viscusi saying that's brilliant, Shaun. You got a new fan. It folds nicely into a lot of inferences.
I've met
synergy
Robert
with other concepts. Yep. Reflective rambling. Thank you very much. Picking up question for Chad Bailey saying Sauron in the Silmarillion. Why didn't he stick with the power behind the throne approach, conquest, that seemed to work to bring down Numenor? Well, so my take on Sauron is that he always seems to have like plan A, which is like secret and cunning, and if that doesn't work, he'll just invade. That seems to be the way that he sort of works. So plan A with the rings, he was going to make all these rings, and the elves, as I was saying just a moment, the elves put them on, and then he controls them, and he's in charge. That doesn't work. Well, I'll just invade Eregion, and I'll get the rings. You get the Numenor thing. That didn't quite. Yes, it worked to a degree. He got rid of Numenor, but that also harmed him hugely, and when he sort of got his strength back, he suddenly found that there was a new Numenor being built effectively on his doorstep, Gondor, which was there, and so he just attacked them. And the same thing when you actually see with what he does in the Lord of the Rings, he doesn't immediately invade. He sends out the Black Riders to try to get the ring. That again, that's the plan. Subtlety first. When subtlety doesn't work, he'll just throw the armies out. So that's my kind of take. His instinct, first of all, is subtlety. When that doesn't work, then he'll go to attack. Shaun, you just checking your fan mail now on everyone loving your comments on that last bit, or have you got any more thoughts about Sauron?
No, I haven't. I mean, I think actually, again, Tolkien, a bit like with Galadriel, Tolkien with writing about Sauron in the First Age is a little bit inconsistent about who he is and what he's there for. You know, the original, some of you may know, the original writings on Sauron, he effectively was a giant cat. So, you know, Sauron changed a lot as a character. So I don't think it's necessarily fully defined what he looked like. And, you know, what one of the things many of us have to remind ourselves about Tolkien is there was a friend, I can't remember who said this, it was another Tolkien scholar. There are Tolkien's best thoughts, there are Tolkien's final thoughts, and there are Tolkien's published thoughts, and they are not all necessarily the same thing.
That's a very good point. You just have to look at something like the Balrogs just to see how well that works. Reflective rambling. Maybe I will end on this because this is getting to the really important issues. The real question for Cloaked One is, are the cloaks as amazing in the finished footage as they seem in promo? We are big fans of cloaks on this here channel. One thing I will say about the Wheel of Time, one thing I hated about the Wheel of Time was how pristine everybody looked. Some of the characters, the white cloaks, their dry cleaning bill must be sky high when they're going through mud every day, but then next morning they wake up absolutely beautiful white clothes. Everybody looked like they came from a catalogue. That is not what we saw in the footage. It looked amazing, but also worn. And I personally like that a lot. With that, I have one more question for you, Shaun, which I ask of all of my, this is a very left field question, but all guests who come on here, because everyone gives me a slightly different answer. And I always find it fascinating. The subject is Tom Bombadil. And the question is, who is Tom Bombadil? And not a long essay, just a short version. What's your take? Who or what is Tom Bombadil?
Yeah, so I don't know if you know this, Robert, but I'm although I've been the chair of the Tolkien Society for nearly 10 years, I'm sure that I've been close to being de-chaired on numerous occasions because I'm not a fan of Tom Bombadil. I think he should have been taken out.
Okay, well, it was nice talking to Shaun.
So I actually think he should have been taken out of the Lord of the Rings. I think my more humorous answer is Tom Bombadil is an error. I think he's a distraction. We have the ring that is all powerful. None can resist it, and the first person they meet outside the Shire can not only can resist it but can wear it and not go invisible. Right. So I think we have to sometimes we have to accept that Tolkien wasn't perfect, and I know lots of people are really fond of Tom Bombadil, but he was a Shire kind of fairy tale story that became real within the Lord of the Rings story, and for me, I think he's a bit of a distraction. Having said that, obviously, I acknowledge Tolkien did include Tom Bombadil, and his editor didn't say to him, take him out. So we have got to him. I suspect he is a little bit almost like a good Ungoliant, which is he's not necessarily a Valar, he's not a Maiar, but he is a spirit that existed since the beginning of Middle Earth, and fundamentally he's almost like the embodiment of nature. I think it's probably the way it works. Whereas Ungoliant is almost like the embodiment of darkness, and I think he's like the embodiment of nature. And I suspect he existed since the dawn of time. Also, Tolkien said he is almost deliberately an enigma. So I think we have to kind of slightly accept that, as irritating as it is.
Yeah. And as I say, everybody's got a slightly different answer on this one. So I tend not to give my thoughts back, because then it leads into a huge debate about the nature of Tom Bombadil, which is fascinating, but not perhaps what people need at the end of a live stream. Shaun, why don't you direct people to where they can find you on the internet, or anything else you want to say about the Tolkien Society?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mentioned at the beginning, the Tolkien Society is an educational charity. We exist to promote interest in and research into the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien. We're a charity and we're fully funded by our members. Anybody can become a member by signing up to the website, which is tolkiensociety.org. Members receive access to our journals. We've got Amon Hen, which is published every 2 months. We've got Malon, that's published once a year. We also have regular newsletters and discount. Members also get discounts at our events, both online and in person. If you want to just follow the Tolkien Society, you can. We're on Facebook. We're at Tolkien Society. We're on Twitter at Tolkien Society. We're on Instagram at TolkSoc. We've even just started a TikTok. Now I've met some other fellow TikTokers. We're at Tolkien Society on TikTok as well. You can also check out me. I'm at Shaun Gunner on Twitter as well. I'm very happy to chat to people. All about Tom Bombadil and the length of Elves' hair and Girthang and everything else we've discussed. Very happy to talk about all of those things.
Excellent news. Well, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure and a delight having you on, and I know that the chat has been very much enjoying your thoughts and views and general knowledge. I will make you disappear for 1 second so I can point at things. If you are watching this back a little bit later, you will find appearing in a few moments here-ish a link to other live streams that I've done. You will find a link appearing here-ish. A link to my Patreon page, which is, if you wish to support this channel, the best way to go and do that. Thank you very much, Shaun. Thank you very much, chat. Moderators, you've done an amazing job today. Huge thanks to you. And take care, everyone. I will be back next week with a Song of Ice and Fire live stream next week. I haven't put it in yet, but it will be happening. Take care, everyone. I shall see you again soon.